Let's get peppy. Welcome to the big episode 91, the grand finale, maybe, we'll get to that at the end, of PEP for 2021. The show is now over. If you want to see our last show, it was Planet America. It's on YouTube, it's on Facebook. You can go have a look. There'll be things we talked about there that we are not going to talk about in this podcast, but we are going to talk about in this podcast. There's a lot of stuff with the great Melina Wicks. Hello, Melina. Thanks for joining us.
Hello.
Now, first of all, we got so much to talk about, right? This is going to be a long one. So I'm going to race through the follow-ups as quickly as I can. If you have anything to say about any of these topics, Melina, please just jump in. But otherwise, I'm going to try and keep it short and sharp. All right. First of all, Chris Christie. We talked about him last week, how he's never going to be president. Dave said he wasn't clear if Chris Christie was running for president or just on a book tour. Well, I hope he's running for president because he was on this week, The View, Fox and Friends, Fox News several times, Fox Business, The Daily Show, HBO twice, CNBC, and yet in the first week, take a guess, Melina Wicks, how many copies of his book he sold in 1 week in America with all that media coverage?
3,000.
Not bad. Not bad. You got a future promoting losers because he sold 2,289 copies in its first week. Now compare that to Jonathan Karl, who had his book come out the same week. Jonathan Karl sold 24,000 hardcore copies. Jonathan Karl is no star. He is no flaming ball of charisma, let me assure you. But Chris Christie, he got done by 12-fold. He ain't going to be president. I'm sorry. And he's not. Sorry?
I tried to pick a low number to indicate my lack of faith in Chris Christie, and I still highballed it.
You did. Poor old Chris. Yeah, I'm sure he'll keep on appearing on these shows anyway. Next thing, election steal. I'll tell you, be fast on each one. Election steal. We've got to follow up on that. Last week, I didn't get the chance to mention it. Interesting, the International Institute for Democracy and Electoral Assistance officially classified America as a democratically backsliding country. If you want to know who America's contemporaries are in that regard, they are also becoming democratically backsliding countries this year, with such luminaries as Brazil, India, Hungary, the Philippines, Poland, and Slovenia. So that's quite a bunch to be grouped with. How do you? On this topic, I'm trying to go just a little dot pointing my way through. I saw a really interesting story about, in my view, how you deal with these pricks. When I say these pricks, I mean the people who try and sow mistrust about elections based on nothing. Now, that's not me being partisan when I say that. I have on this podcast a number of times talked about ways in which I think the Democrats are a bit fast and loose with their electoral laws. But there are undoubtedly claims that are clearly not true, that no one rational could think that they were running lawsuits on just to create mistrust. And the way you deal with those pricks, it was made very clear last week from a federal magistrate judge in Colorado who, 11 months after a lawsuit was launched, which clearly had no merit whatsoever, it was a suit on behalf of 160 million American voters about the stolen election. It was for $160 billion they were suing, I don't know who. It was full of bullshit. It was one of those classic conspiracy theory type lawsuits. No one who doesn't have brain damage was taking this seriously. Somehow they managed to spin it out for 11 months. The judge just ordered for them to personally, the lawyers, to personally, out of their own money, pay $180,000 to cover the legal fees of the state and private company defendants in that suit. So it wasn't just pay costs from the other side. It was the people who have to pay costs are the lawyers themselves who agreed to take on that lawsuit, which I found really interesting. And the reason he picked $180,000, this judge, was because he said he wanted to hurt them, but he wanted to make it actually payable by them. And he estimated what he thought was the right amount to hit them hard, but actually come out of their cash. Like he didn't want them to declare bankruptcy. He didn't want like if he just goes, oh, you owe $1 trillion, they're never going to pay that. But if you say, okay, I'm going to estimate exactly how much I think is going to hurt you, but be a realistic payment amount, that's what he did. And I thought, good on you, mate. Like, good on you. Because the two lawyers, in this case, they argued, it was a Dominion voting systems one. There's one of those ones, and Facebook were involved, and elected officials in 4 states were all involved in this grand conspiracy. And the judge ruled the attorneys had violated their ethical obligations by filing the case, saying they'd broken rules against clogging the courts with frivolous motions and lodging information in court that is not true. So you go, mwah. And just be clear, I'm not suggesting this is not a freedom of speech type thing. I'm not trying to stop good faith lawsuits here. And there were plenty of potential lawsuits with the last election. I'm not saying there were no potential lawsuits. I don't think there would be any successful lawsuits, but there were potential good faith lawsuits there. The Dominion ones were not good faith lawsuits. And so I love the idea of punishing the lawyers for lodging blatantly bullshit lawsuits. So well done, Judge. Anything to add there?
Sounds like a good call.
Unemployment, another follow-up. We've been talking about this endlessly. The numbers came out, the new numbers for November came out a couple of days ago. 210,000 jobs, very disappointing number, given that at the moment they want something in the order of $400,000 or $500,000 a month. They're still trying to catch up the massive gap they've got in jobs there from the pandemic. But these numbers are a bit weird because every number except for the main number, the 210,000 jobs, was really positive. The unemployment rate dropped from 4.6% to 4.2%. It's a big jump. It's a big drop. It was 6.7% 12 months ago. Like it took 3.5 years in the last recession to go from March 2014 to September 2017 to go through the same drop. It just went through in the last 12 months. Now I know different situations, but still, it's a big drop. Also, other indicators were great as well. Number of people working was up by 1.1 million. The number of adults not in the labour force, who are neither working or looking for work, that fell by 473,000. The number of unemployed people fell by 542,000 to 6.9 million. Now, you might go, how's that possible? How's it possible there's only 210,000 new jobs, but there's this huge drop in unemployment and a huge increase in employment? It's because they're different surveys. There are 2 different surveys they take at the same time. The survey with the 210,000 jobs was a different survey to those other numbers. So also the labour force participation rate, it went up to 61.8%. The employment population ratio increased by 0.4% to 59.2%. That's a big jump. So in conclusion, I think that 210,000 job survey was probably wrong, like it happens, especially during this pandemic. With seasonal adjustments, they seasonally adjust the figures a lot, and they're guessing. And every single month they've been adjusting up the previous months, and even in this month they did it as well. They adjusted up. They had revisions to September and October job growth up 82,000. So they keep on every month upgrading the previous months because they keep on overshooting with their seasonal adjustments. So my suspicion is just wait for another month. I'm betting the revisions for this month were probably up 100 or 200,000 jobs, but we'll see. We'll see. Anyway, that's my guess. I wouldn't go too early on that one because it was weird that one survey had just one negative number and the rest had 1 million positive numbers. So I don't know. We'll see about that. And while we're talking about that, petrol prices have gone down 2 cents. Woo, 2 cents. It's gone from $3.40 to $3.30 a gallon, which is still nothing compared to Australia. It's less than $1 a litre. But it was funny because the DCCC posted a tweet of a graph from just the last 2 weeks showing it gone down 2 cents. They blew up the y-axis. So it was down to $3.40.000, and then $3.39.995. It was like that. They blew up the y-axis to a ridiculous amount. So it seemed to go down the entire y-axis when it was only dropping 2 cents a litre. It's just a ridiculous graph. Actually, I'll put it up. For those who are watching the video, that's the graph there. Ridiculous. For those listening, trust me, it's ridiculous. And the reason I mention this, obviously it's ridiculous that they're trying to sell a 2 cent drop when it increased by $1 a gallon in the last month. Like under Joe Biden, it went from $2.40 to $3.40. Not blaming Joe Biden, it's going up everywhere. But although Joe Biden had a bit to do with it. But only a little bit. But the whole thing is stupid, obviously. The reason I'm highlighting it is just to show how concerned they are about petrol prices. Clearly, they are obsessed with petrol prices, as in the Biden administration, because the American people are. And so they're running scared, and every little drop they're going to try and get something out of because they know it's hurting them. If you look at the polls, I'll just say one poll, Washington Post ABC last week. His job approval overall was 43%, which is not great, but his job approval in Arizona, Florida, Georgia, Nevada, New Hampshire, North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, pretty important states, was 33%. On his handling of the pandemic, his approval in those key swing states was 11 points lower than the rest of the country. And registered voters in those states were supporting Republicans over Democrats for the House, 58 to 35. In the rest of the country, it was 49 to 42. So in particular, in the key states, the Democrat administration's on the nose, and I think petrol prices have a lot to do with it. And I'm sure they think that as well. One more follow-up on Hunter Biden. Actually, not so much on Hunter Biden as well, I'll explain. Miranda Devine's got a book out at the moment about Hunter Biden, all his corruption. We've spoken a lot about Hunter Biden's corruption on this podcast over the last year and a half. I haven't had a chance to go through her book yet. I might not. We'll see. I'm on holiday. Stuff reading. but like there may well be something to it. I'm not saying there isn't. But I do think it's important to keep Hunter Biden in context. And I'm not doing a both sides thing here, even though I am kind of. But I think it's important to keep the context going at all times. Every time you mention Hunter Biden ripping off potentially a couple of $1 million out of, because Hunter Biden's the son of the president. He has definitely made millions of dollars off his father's name for investment funds, and there is no doubt about that. He's made money off his father's name. Whether his father corruptly has given off favors as a result of that, now that I don't know. I don't know if Miranda Devine's got anything to say about that. But Hunter Biden has certainly profited from his father in dubious circumstances. Okay, so let's just make that clear. Now, Jared Kushner is the ex and possibly future president's son-in-law, quite similar to a son. Unlike Hunter Biden, he's part of the administration. He was part of the administration, and he would be part of the future administration, would have genuine influence himself without his father or father-in-law. Right now, he is trying to raise money from the Persian Gulf states for a new investment firm he's founded, Affinity Partners. Pretty Hunter-esque, if you ask me. Qatar and the Emirates have rejected him. Saudi Arabia, not so much. They're negotiating with their very, very, very large investment fund to invest what Kushner hopes will be the sum in the low billions early next year. Now, it might not happen. He might not get billions of dollars out of Saudi Arabia, but if he does, it's worth keeping an eye on that, I would suggest. I would suggest that Hunter wishes he could graft like Jared Kushner can graft. And Hunter wishes he had the kind of influence that Jared Kushner has. So, yes, I'm doing a both sides thing here, but I think it's a legitimate both sides thing. Hunter Biden, yes, corrupt. May or may not have succeeded with corruption, but corrupt. Jared Kushner smells kind of funky to me. Any thoughts?
I was going to say, when you said earlier that you wanted to talk about Hunter Biden today, I thought it was going to be about the revelation that he's secret best friends with Tucker Carlson.
I didn't know that. I haven't been reading for the last few days. So what's this?
Some exciting Hunter Biden news.
Yeah.
From leaked emails from the laptop that was mysteriously left in the Delaware computer store between Hunter Biden and Tucker Carlson, where Tucker Carlson is asking Hunter Biden to write a letter of recommendation for his son to get into college. And my one observation from that is that it really says something about how money and power operates in the US, that a college recommendation from Hunter Biden means anything to anybody, but apparently it does.
Wow. I wonder if it still does. When was this? How long ago was this?
It's not that long ago. I think it was about 2015 from memory.
Wow.
Like recent enough that it's surprising.
So, but this was when Tucker Carlson had only just started on Fox News then. So he hadn't gone full on, like when he first started, I remember he was trying to be scrupulously nonpartisan. He kind of dropped that along the way. But
there was one email where Hunter referred, must have been someone else, referred to Tucker as being someone he disagreed with on everything but a good friend. So he definitely at least transitioned to conservative at that point in time. So
wow. Well, that's a really interesting story. And you're right. It does, like, and that's totally the knock on Tucker Carlson as well. One of the knocks is that he acts as if he's the enemies of all these people when actually he pals up with them behind the scenes. So it does kind of confirm that. That is interesting. That is breaking news. Thank you, Melina. That's enough of the follow-ups. The only other thing which I want to mention, which we mentioned on the show, but we're not going to mention on the go into too much detail here. We focused a bit on Trump, the story about Trump having COVID earlier than we thought, from Jonathan Carl's book, the one that sold 24,000 copies in the first week. Chris Christie. There was actually, no, it's not from Jonathan Carl, it's from Mark Meadows' book. Sorry, that will also outsell Chris Christie's book. I boldly predict. But yeah, from Mark Meadows' book, he had a story that Trump tested positive on the 26th of September 2020, which is 5 days earlier than we thought he tested positive. And then he tested negative after that, according to the story. I'm emphasizing that he then tested negative because Mark Meadows is currently doing the rounds, saying that the story that Trump tested positive 5 days earlier is fake news, even though it's his story. Because he said, it was a false positive. It was a false positive because it was negative afterwards. Can't have been real. Otherwise, we wouldn't have tested negative afterwards. That's an amazing coincidence, I feel, that he got COVID straight after a false positive test, especially given that it usually takes days and days to have the effects of COVID. And he was on oxygen hours after he tested positive on the 1st of October. So that's an amazing coincidence right there. Normally it would take, a week maybe before you're on oxygen when you first contract COVID. But apparently Trump, it just happened real fast. It happened like 3 hours he was on oxygen. How about that? I also should note that when they said, I just want to point out a couple of things I didn't get onto the show. When they said they retested the Trump and got a negative test, they didn't give him another test. No. They took the sample that they'd already used and tested again with a different rapid test, not a proper test, a rapid test, right? You're not meant to do that. You're not meant to do it twice because it obviously affects the sample when you run a test on it. But they didn't care. They just ran the same sample anyway with a different rapid test. Oh, it's negative. Great. Okay, we're not going to test him for the next 6 days, even though he's supposed to be tested before the debate. That was one of the conditions of the debate. We're not going to test him, and we're not going to give him a proper test, even though he already tested positive, because it must be false because he tested negative. He inverted commas tested negative a couple of seconds later. So yeah, no problems. Okay, so obviously there's some wishful thinking going on here of them trying to pretend he didn't test positive so you keep on campaigning like he wanted to do. So I don't buy that false positive for a second, obviously. But that's why. So given that Trump should have known that he was a big chance of being positive, if not actually knowing, but pretending otherwise, what did he do? This is his calendar. He held a rally on 26th of September. He held an event with the Gold Star families on 27th of September. He held an outdoor event on the 28th of September. He had the debate on the 29th of September. He had the Minnesota fundraiser on the 30th of September. And then he had a New Jersey fundraiser and tested positive on the 1st of October. So that was his schedule during the period he should have known that he was positive. What that means is that when he blamed the military guys for his COVID diagnosis, I've got the quote here, they all came in and they all talked about their son and daughter and father. They tell me these stories and I can't say back up, stand 10 feet away, you know, I just can't do it. I went through like 35 people and everyone has a different story. They come within an inch of my face sometimes. They want to hug me. They want to kiss me. And they do. And frankly, I'm not telling them to back up. I'm not doing it. But obviously it's a dangerous thing, I guess, if you go by the COVID thing. That's what he said after he'd been officially diagnosed as with COVID, essentially implying it was their fault. That was the day after he tested positive. Okay, so such bullshit, right? And so he was endangering them. All those people coming up to his cheek and kissing him. Why is he wearing a mask? Anyway, so that's the first thing. And the second thing I'd say is, what about his family? Do you remember that debate? His family came in and they were the only people in the entire theatre not wearing masks, apart from the participants. They all sat there without masks when at least some of them must have known he'd tested positive. At least Melania must have known that he tested positive, and they're all sitting there without masks when it was a condition of entry that they were all to be tested before they went in. They clearly weren't tested. They clearly didn't have masks. And it was a condition of entry as well that they wear masks. They were asked to wear masks and they ignored them and just sat down. So now that you know, in hindsight, that they had a pretty good idea that Trump was positive at the time, it looks so much worse. Like, I know Trump's do things with impunity, but okay, let's put it this way. I don't want to make assumptions. If anyone in that group who knew he had tested positive, maybe none of them did, but anyone in that group who knew that he tested positive, who then didn't get tested themselves and came in and sat there without a mask, those people are objectively horrible people. Okay, I don't know if that applies to any of the Trump family, because I don't know, but it sure seems like it. If it does, then that's my claim. They are objectively horrible people, but maybe it doesn't. So I don't want to be unfair. You have anything to add on the Trump COVID thing?
I agree with your assessment. The one thing I'll pull you up on is I would suggest that Melania is probably the least likely person to know anything Trump is up to with everyone in his family. But other than that, I agree.
That's a fair call. You have shown me up nicely there. Quick stats nugget, and then let's get into the first real story of this podcast. Stats nugget. Woo! That was good dancing, Melina. I did appreciate that. You get into it so much more than Dr. Dave does. This was part of a very long post from one of my favorite bloggers, Kevin Drum, who was he's got a bee in his bonnet about California. He's from California. He's got a bee in his bonnet about people trashing California all the time. He wrote this massive long post about Texas versus California, and because people like to compare California to Texas. And yeah, he made a lot of good points. But there was one there which I was like, oh my God, I had no idea, which is just a great stat. So I'm going to share it with everyone. And that is about taxes. When you think of Texas, you think that's a low taxing state, don't you? That's what I think. Is that what you think?
Yep.
Yeah. When you think California, you think that's a high taxing state. All right. These are the numbers. There is a big difference in tax between California and Texas if you're in the top 20%. The top 20% in Texas pay 3.1% of their income in tax. It's the state taxes. The top 20% in California pay 12.4% in taxes. That's a big difference. That's the top 20%. The middle 60% in California pay 8.9% tax. And in Texas, they pay 9.7% tax. They pay more. The middle class pay more in Texas than in California. And the poorest 20% in California pay 10% tax. and they pay 13% tax in Texas. So,
That's
so apart from the top 20%, you pay more taxes in Texas than you do in California. It's just the top 20%. Just California's got a more progressive tax system. So I need to put my brain back together after that. Pieces blown everywhere. And some of those pieces are from your Tucker Carlson story, by the way. I still can't quite get over that. I suppose if you're going to be friends with anyone, Hunter Biden's a good guy to be friends with. He knows how to party. But anyway, putting all my brain back together, let's get on to the first main story, which we covered at length on the show, but there's so much more to say about, and that is the Supreme Court case about abortion, Dobbs. So first of all, let me split this up into two sections, the legal side and the politics side, because they're two different kinds of things. Let's start with legal. Do you have any thoughts about the kind of arguments that were made, anything about the actual court case itself before we talk about the ifs and buts of the politics of the question?
I mean, it certainly seems like the overturning of Roe v. Wade is going to happen, which is a bit shocking that it's happening so quickly and so kind of blatantly. Like, you know, there was obviously like lots of speculation that they might dance around it or kind of white ant it, you know, over time. And it seems like we're heading towards a pretty dramatic, just total overturning, kicking it all back to the states, which will obviously mean very different circumstances for women across America, depending on what state you live in. There was one argument from Amy Coney Barrett that I found particularly objectionable, which is because obviously with abortion, it's such a difficult area because you're trying to balance two legitimate rights, the right to life and the right to bodily autonomy. And that's a very genuinely difficult thing to wrestle with. Like, I think that people can, in good faith, have completely opposed, very passionate views on this issue. And, you know, the idea that you can kind of come to, you know, everyone draws the line somewhere in terms of when abortion is appropriate. Some say never at all. Most people would say probably not, you know, 36 weeks or whatever. But, you know, between those extremes, there's, you know, lots of people drawing the line at different places. And the idea that you can kind of have an objective line, you know, whether it's conception or heartbeat or viability, which different groups try to draw, you know, there is no actual objective line about when it's okay and when it's not okay. It's a personal moral decision. And the fact that it is so politicized in America, I think, is a very unfortunate thing. But having said that, you know, in terms of people trying to kind of make rational arguments about what is a very personal, emotional issue, one argument that Amy Coney Barrett made, which I really disliked, was comparing the bodily autonomy element of the debate, comparing carrying an unwanted pregnancy to term to vaccine mandates, which I think is very stupid for a number of reasons. First of all, it's not the case with vaccine mandates in the state that you get no choice. You still get a choice. You could say having to choose between keeping your job and getting a vaccine is a bad choice, and that's fine if you feel that way, but you still have another option other than no one's pinning people down and forcing them to get the vaccines. Yeah. So that's one thing. Second of all, pregnancy is 9 months and incredibly difficult mentally and physically, even when it's a pregnancy that you want. So the idea that that's the same as getting a shot and feeling fluey for a day or two, I think is not a fair comparison. And the other thing is pregnancy is also much riskier. I looked it up, and 700 women die in America each year from pregnancy or delivery complications. The COVID vaccine, 459 million doses, 6 deaths so far, and all Johnson & Johnson from blood clots. So you can just not take that one if you're scared. So the idea that these things are comparable and that, you know, you can sort of say, dismiss it as lightly as, you know, I'll just get a shot, I'll just carry a baby you don't want to term, even if you're in a potentially dangerous situation. Like, you know, people talk about rape and incest a lot. There's also domestic violence or extreme poverty, all kinds of reasons why you might have a very good reason for not wanting to carry a child to term. I found very objectionable.
Yeah. There was another part of the argument as well, which she threw in as well, as part of what you're just describing, when she was talking about how we misinterpreted the burden that was placed on the pregnant mother when we're talking about the burden of what they have to go through. She was saying it's not just like people are, I'll read her quote. It seems to me both Roe and Casey emphasize the burdens of parenting, and insofar as you and many of your amici focus on the ways in which forced parenting, forced motherhood would hinder women's access to the workplace and to equal opportunities. It's also focused on the consequences of parenting, the obligations of motherhood that flow from pregnancy. Why don't the safe haven laws take care of that problem? What she's referring to there is safe haven laws in America say that you can drop off your child anonymously, like as a baby, when they're born for adoption, no questions asked. They won't know nothing about it. They even need to know your identity. You just put it in a chute, literally in a chute. There's an alarm that goes off and they pick up the baby immediately. All right. So that's what she's referring to there. And then she says, it seems to me that the choice more focused would be between, say, the ability to get an abortion at 23 weeks or the state requiring the woman to go 15, 16 weeks more and then terminate parental rights at the conclusion. So she's suggesting that we assume the burden of childbirth and motherhood combined when we talk about this issue. But she's saying motherhood, that's not an issue because you can give it up. It's just the burden of childbirth, which she then, as you say, compared to vaccine mandates, which was interesting. Now, to be fair to her, I don't think she was saying they were equal. Like, I hope she wasn't saying they were equal. I mean, look, hey, Melina, you know more than I do. You've had a kid. You've had the vaccine. What was worse as far as the burden goes? You tell me.
Quite different. Both good things for me. Both things that I wanted, but yeah, one was quite more difficult to go through than the other. I would argue.
I think I know which one. Okay, but anyway, but yeah, the fact is, while Barrett, I'm sure, would agree that the burden of just childbirth alone is greater than the burden of a vaccine mandate. Nevertheless, she's the one using this stupid argument which compares the two. So she can't complain when you then go, well, that's a dumb argument. Anyway, I agree with you on that one. That was a dubious argument for me. A couple of arguments which I didn't mention on the show, which I'd like to mention, a bit of bonus coach for you here. What I did mention on the show just briefly was that I mentioned how Planned Parenthood versus Casey is actually the legal authority on abortion now, not Roe versus Wade. We refer to Roe versus Wade, but Planned Parenthood versus Casey kind of changed the test a little bit. It said a two-part test, which was one, women have a right to an abortion before viability, and two, states can restrict that option as long as they don't place an undue burden on the woman seeking an abortion. Okay, so that's the test as it exists at the moment. Roberts tried to narrow that test to lose the first part and just say it should be about undue burden. So he said you can ban abortions flat out before viability as long as there is an undue burden on them seeking an abortion, i.e. that they have the time and the ability to make a choice, a free choice to abort their baby should they choose to do so. That was what Roberts was sort of gunning for. The pro-choice advocates actually shot that down and said it wouldn't be workable, which was interesting. They didn't let Roberts build that case. While Roberts was trying to save the right for abortion federally, they weren't letting him to do that. Now, what I took out of that, which I found, I actually asked our interviewee about that as well, and she said the same thing that I was thinking, which was, that says to me that they've already given up, that the pro-choice people have already decided there is no way we're going to win this case, at least in the long run, with this court. And so we're not going to bother trying to fight for degrees of victory legally. Let's let them have a complete victory and then fight them politically. Because it's a lot cleaner to fight them politically if you go, abortion's banned. So let's fight that in the legislature. You know, what about the women who've been raped? What about the women? And you can then fight bit by bit. Whereas if there's this wishy-washy grey area where you go, well, it's not really been banned, but just no one in Texas can get an abortion, that's a bit harder to argue with in the court of public opinion. And so I feel like the fact that it seems to me like they've just decided, the pro-choice side have just decided we aren't going anywhere with the Supreme Court. Let's just call it quits and focus on the political argument from here on in. That's my take on that, at the very least. Because otherwise, it was very strange that they were shooting down Roberts' attempt to save some kind of abortion rights. So we've started the next phase of this particular battle, in other words. There's a lot of talk about whether this decision will be seen as political, especially from Sonia Sotomayor, whose name I can never say. Sotomayor, I think that's how you say it. My name is Lucidello and I have trouble pronouncing it. Anyway, she spoke of the perceived stench from the Supreme Court and about whether it's political or not. And to me, this is clearly political, leaving aside the obvious conservatives saying one thing and liberals saying another thing, leaving that aside. This particular case, I've said this a number of times, but I can't say it enough. When Mississippi first brought this case, they specifically argued in their original petition that they weren't seeking the court to overturn Roe or Casey. That was part of their petition. You do not need to overturn Roe or Casey. Whereas as soon as the membership of the court changed, as soon as Coney Barrett joined, all of a sudden they changed it. Bang! They changed their petition to, we must overrule Roe and Casey. They are egregiously wrong. The court should absolutely overrule this. So they changed it as soon as the political situation changed. So that, by definition, is a political situation legally. So that to me is pretty clear. It's a political situation. There's an argument going with John Roberts as well, where he was trying to draw a comparison between America's laws and international laws. In particular, he was fond of a stat that said that there are only 7 countries in the world where you can have elective abortions with no reason required. You can have any reason you want past the 20-week mark. He said there's only 7 countries, and 2 of them are North Korea and China, and the 3rd one is America. He's quite fond of that one. That was disputed in court. Well, at least according to Washington Post in 2017, that's true. It may have changed since 2017, but the Washington Post ran a fact check on this one in 2017. That study is based on a 2014 study, but the Washington Post looked into it. And what that study suggested was that there are 59 countries in the world with no reason required abortions at any stage of pregnancy. 7 of the 59 allow no reason required after 20 weeks. Those 7 are Canada, China, Netherlands, North Korea, Singapore, the US, and Vietnam. Now, I need to make a caution here. That's federal laws, because some countries have state laws, like Australia, for instance. And in Australia, some states you can go past 20 weeks without reasons. Some states you can't. I've actually got it here in case you're interested. Tasmania allows no reason required abortions up to 16 weeks. Western Australia does it up to 20 weeks. Queensland and New South Wales do it up to 22 weeks. Victoria does it up to 24 weeks. ACT has no limit at all. You can just get abortions whenever you want, no reasons required. South Australia and Northern Territory never allow no reason required abortions. You need the permission of a doctor to get an abortion in those states. So and in all those other states, you can go past those dates if you have the doctor's permission. So you need a reason, but you need the doctor to check it off. But before then, doesn't matter. You can just get an abortion whenever you want, up to the dates which I just said. So we're kind of half and half in Australia.
There's also presumably some nuance across different states and different countries around the world in terms of how stringent that reason test is. Like in some, I mean, I haven't done the research on this, but I assume that in some places in the world, a reason might be a very restrictive thing, and in other places it might be effectively going to a doctor and getting a rubber stamp, and that is meaningfully very different in practice. You can't just say that it's so fundamentally different from the US just because there's a reason required necessarily.
I think it's a very fair call, and I think Australia is exactly like that. Like if you go past those dates, for instance, New South Wales, 22 weeks in New South Wales, it says, in fact, in every state, it says when you go past the dates I just told you, it says if you get permission from 2 separate doctors, you can get an abortion. So, yeah, that they may well be quite considerate in regards to that process. Absolutely. Okay, there's one more argument which kind of annoyed me a little bit, which is from Clarence Thomas. He gave the age-old argument, which we hear all the time with this, which is, where does it mention abortion in the Constitution? Where's it mentioned? Doesn't mention it anywhere. And the way he expressed it was slightly more legalistically. He said, if I were to ask you what constitutional right protects the right to abortion, is it privacy? Is it autonomy? What would it be? And he kept on asking, what is the right? What is the actual right in the Constitution that protects abortion? So it's implied abortion isn't mentioned, mate. What's the head of power you're using? And the answer to that question is actually in Casey, because they discussed this exact issue in Casey when they considered Roe versus Wade the first time, back in 1992. And the answer is, quote, constitutional protection of the women's decision to terminate her pregnancy derives from the due process clause of the 14th Amendment. It declares that no state shall deprive any person of life, liberty, or property without due process of law. The answer is liberty. That is the right, liberty. And that's exactly what Rickelman, the advocate from the Center for Reproductive Rights, said. She said, in answer to that question, the first time Thomas asked it, it's liberty, Your Honour. It's the textual protection in the 14th Amendment. The state can't deprive a person of liberty without due process of law. And the court has interpreted liberty to include the right to make family decisions and the right to physical autonomy, including the right to end a pre-viability pregnancy. That's almost word for word out of Casey. Like, she's done her work. She knows what she's talking about. Thomas ignored her, just asked it again. But what right? What exact right? And then she went on to say, for a state to take control of a woman's body and require that she go through pregnancy and childbirth with all the physical risks and life-altering consequences that brings is a fundamental deprivation of her liberty. Which, to me, as someone who doesn't like the original Roe versus Wade decision, like, I don't think it was legally argued well, that's a pretty solid answer, I thought, that she gave there, I've got to say. And that's not the way the original Roe versus Wade was argued, but that is a sensible way to argue it, in my view. Clarence Thomas, I suspect, disagrees. But anyway, I thought he was being quite oblivious to what was, I think, a pretty well-known fact from Casey. It was quite obtuse, I felt. Anyway.
Also, I think, disingenuous to say if something isn't literally written in the Constitution, we can't possibly interpret it in any way, because that is literally his job, to interpret the Constitution. If every single thing about how the law should be was clearly written with no need for interpretation, you wouldn't need a Supreme Court. Just do what the document says.
That is true. That is true. That is true. Oh, and I should also mention Kavanaugh's stare decisis argument, which was, because that's a real issue. Stare decisis means that you follow precedent. And usually when courts overturn previous decisions, they do it by qualifying or reinterpreting the previous decision to kind of suit a different outcome, but it's not direct overrule. They don't tend to do direct overrules, but sometimes they do. Every now and then they flat out cancel culture, Supreme Court. They flat out cancel previous decisions, but it's rare. It's rare they do that. And Kavanaugh tried to come up with a justification. This was it. If you think about some of the most important cases, the most consequential cases in the court's history, there's a string of them where the cases overruled precedent. So the question on stare decisis is why, if we think that the prior precedents are seriously wrong, why then doesn't the history of this court's practice with respect to those cases tell us that the right answer is actually a return to the position of neutrality and to not stick with those precedents in the same way that all those other cases didn't? Okay, well, what he's saying is, if we disagree, why don't we just do whatever we want, essentially? That's what he's saying. And I'd say, first of all, that Casey did consider this and it held the precedent. So it's already been upheld once. So if you're overturning it, you're overturning not just Roe versus Wade, but also Casey. So you'd want to have a good reason to overturn both. And both of them use different reasons as well. Like I just said, they use different arguments. So that makes it a bit more difficult if you're being true to the law, that is. Secondly, let's be honest. If a judge thinks a precedent is seriously wrong, then you would expect them to overrule it. Of course you would. I mean, if we're talking about slavery or something like that, like something big, then you wouldn't go, oh, you need to stand by that. Like regardless, like just for the letter of the law, regardless of some great harm being done. I don't think anyone would argue that unless they happen to disagree with the decision. If they disagree with the decision, then they'd argue, oh yeah, how about stare decisis? But otherwise, they wouldn't give us stuff, which is exactly what we're finding right now. it's just hard to know when such a move is justified. And Kavanaugh didn't give us any clues as to when the movement. He just basically said when I want. So that's not really useful. I don't know what to make of that. It just seemed pretty easy from Kavanaugh. I would expect if he wants to be taken seriously, he's gonna have to do better than that. Let's see in the judgment, because I'm sure there'll be a bit on that. Do you have anything else to say about the arguments being made before we go into the politics?
I just there was one interesting point I think made by the interview on the Planet American TV show the other day about it being, in terms of precedents being overturned, it being a lot of those sort of big examples of that when people's rights have been restricted and overturning those kinds of decisions. And it's much more unusual to overturn a precedent in a way that would take away people's rights. And I would just say on that I think the threshold for doing that should be much, much higher. So in terms of correcting wrong mistakes, obviously society progresses. So, when you're overturning, rulings that upheld segregation and things like that, obviously that's the right thing to do to overturn those precedents. But if you're going to overturn a precedent that gave people more rights to have the effect of giving people fewer rights, I feel like you need to have a really good argument to justify that, whatever the case is.
That's fair enough. Although I'm sure that if there was a social conservative as part of this conversation, they would say, well, you're kind of giving the fetus more rights. I'm sure they would make that point. But yes, I agree. I agree with that point. It's a good point. It's no, that's fair. That's fair. It was a good interview, by the way, that one as well. And it's blown my mind. My brain's been blown apart again twice in the one podcast because you actually watch our show. I'm not used to that kind of treatment from Dr. Dave at all. Anyway, it's very weird. Don't know what to make of this strange new world where people watch the TV show. Let's talk to politics. Okay, you go first. What are you expecting? Because there's a lot of potential outcomes here between backlashes and electoral whitewashes and all the rest of it. What are you expecting to happen from here on in, assuming that the Supreme Court overturns Roe versus Wade and Casey?
Yeah, I mean, like I said before, I think it is very unfortunate that it is such a toxic political issue in the States in a way that it's not, in Australia, for example. I think that that's a bad thing, and I think it's going to get worse. Yeah. I think it's interesting the strategy this is partly the legal strategy, but I think it will flow into the political strategy. The idea that people don't want to have the compromise position that John Roberts put forward. People would rather have it completely overturned and have the fight. They're making that strategic choice is interesting to me because ordinarily I would be, if you were going from a situation where people had the full right to abortion now and that was being overturned, I'd be very wary of that strategy. I would say if you're pro-choice, having some option is better than no option. But I can see how they've gotten to that point because realistically, in practice, on the ground, meaningful access to abortion has been restricted so much in parts of America systematically over years and years and years that there are lots of states where, I believe there's only one abortion clinic left in all of Mississippi now anyway, which is where this case has come from. So I feel like
six states with one abortion clinic in them.
Yeah. So I think it's kind of reasonable at this point that they've recognized that it's already been white entered to the point where, that right is so meaningfully eroded that you probably are better off having the fight and focusing the minds of people who care about that issue, because it's been the case for a long time that people on the pro-life side are more activated by that issue politically than people on the pro-choice side, even if they're not a majority overall. So I imagine they're going to try to make it a political issue, whether those people who are on the pro-life side do get activated by it now in a way they haven't before kind of remains to be seen. I'm a bit skeptical as to whether it will overtake other issues, about like the economy and COVID, which I think are just always going to be more front of mind for people. But I think the toxicity of the debate is going to get worse. And that's a shame because, as I said, I think that people, I respect the views of people on both sides of the issue. I think it's a genuinely difficult issue. I think it's genuinely a moral position that individuals all have to come to on their own. And so I really dislike it being this sort of big partisan, battering ram that people use to try and turn out votes for parties, not just for this issue, but just in general for partisan benefit.
And that, of course, is part of the logic behind pro-choice, that you're going, look, this is a terrible moral quandary, which is very, very hard to solve. and no one's forcing you to have an abortion. But we don't want to get involved with your decision about this because it's a horrible moral decision to make. It's not a simple decision. And for that reason, it shouldn't be left to courts. It should be left to people and doctors. That's a pro-choice argument. Yeah. Which actually interesting, it comes through in the polling as well. Like the polling is so confused on this. Like the more you look at the polling, the less you know. Like it really depends on, there's a lot of ignorance out there. People don't understand the current law. They don't understand what the situation is. They are easily confused by different wordings, which you see this all the time with abortion, essentially push polls, try and push people into particular outcomes. It's really easy to do. There are a few things that are overwhelming though. Like for instance, an ABC Washington Post poll from early November, 75% of Americans thought abortion should be left to a woman and her doctor, while only 20% thought it should be regulated by law. That's what I'm talking about. The off your back of your point there about the horrible decision. I don't want to make that decision for someone else. Like that is, I think, what a lot of Americans feel generally. Even if they have qualms about abortion themselves, they feel uneasy about getting involved in other people's decisions in that regard. I should also add that in November, there was a YouGov poll where 13% of Americans thought it was very likely that the Supreme Court would overturn Roe versus Wade. So there are the potential seeds of a backlash there, where a large number of people go, none of my business, and a large number of people go, well, they're not going to overturn it anyway. So if they do overturn it, and then it becomes the business of the government, and you can bet your life that will be the political argument being made by the left on this, that, oh yeah, the government's interfering with your uterus, etc. That could potentially have a big effect on people's reactions. There could be a backlash, potentially. But there's so much confusion, Melina, honestly. Like I mentioned on the show, that 54% in the YouGov poll said that they'd like Roe versus Wade to remain in place, while the 27% that was, but only 44% disapproved of the Mississippi law. So if you think about it, hang on. So only 44% disapprove of the Mississippi law, but 54% want Roe versus Wade to stay in place. The Mississippi law is harsher than, like Mississippi law gets rid of Roe versus Wade. It just makes no sense. So there's this in-between group of people who have no idea what they're saying. You know, and equally, only 38% of the people in states with trigger laws know that those trigger laws exist, know that their states will have no abortion if Roe versus Wade is overturned. The trigger laws I'm referring to is in states, there's like 21 states that have automatic laws. As soon as Roe versus Wade is overturned by the Supreme Court, bang, next day, abortion's banned completely in that state. And only 38% of people living in those states realize that. So there's a lot of confusion and there's a lot of potential unknown reactions at the moment with this kind of stuff. One thing I would say, when you look at the polling, the only thing that comes through consistently is there's a large number of people who support, in theory, first trimester abortions, and a large number of people who oppose, in theory, second trimester abortions. Like, for example, AP poll from last month, 61% of Americans supported abortion being legal in most or all circumstances in the first trimester. 65% said it should be illegal in the second trimester. The first trimester ends at 13 weeks. So that is within the realms of the Mississippi law, which is a 15-week ban. So Mississippi is where the polling's at, if you believe the polling. In fact, it's more generous than the polling, if you believe the polling. Although actually a 15-week ban is like a 12-week ban or 13-week ban because it goes from the last period. So that's actually pretty much spot on first trimester in reality. I should also add the Mississippi, sorry?
There's also quite a big difference between the beginning of the second trimester and the end of the second trimester in terms of how far along things actually are.
Yeah, I'm just talking about the polling.
No, I know. But in terms of people's confusion about it, like, you know, I had them talking about this on 538, that, you know, they were kind of theorizing about the disconnect being that people see Roe versus Wade as just a proxy for a legal right to abortion, which most people support. But in terms of where people draw the line, people don't necessarily understand exactly where Roe versus Wade draws the line, and everyone draws the line in a slightly different place. And it comes down to, you know, at what point do you think that fetus is now a baby? And so I think that that's where you just get, if you ask every individual person, there's not a coherent, settled political answer to that question.
Yeah, I think that's true. I think it's true. And I mean, I think this is what you're implying as well, that a lot of people probably have no idea what 14 weeks pregnant means. I mean, I'm sure a pregnant woman does, but I think a lot of people answering those questions have no idea. Like,
yeah, I mean, I didn't know any of that until, you know, I've recently had a baby, and I didn't know any of, you know, where those milestones were until I went through it myself. So with the Texas law being 6 weeks, 6 weeks sounds like a decent amount of time to know what's going on. And I didn't know until I went through it that you don't actually know it's 6 weeks. Like, I did this podcast when I was about 5 weeks along, and I didn't know yet. So I knew it was potential, but not confirmed. And so, you know, your equation of whether something is reasonable or not changes a lot once you understand, you know, what stage you're actually at all those week by week markers.
Sure. I should also add, by the way, that in reality, in terms of like the percentage of abortions that are conducted, 95% of them are conducted by the 15-week mark, and 93% are conducted by the end of the first trimester. So even if you did have some kind of earlier limit, like Roberts wants, it would probably take care of most abortions. Like, most abortions would probably still be conducted anyway. But yeah, that's not on the table. So from the looks of things, so let's not worry about that. As far as politics goes, this decision is going to be handed down in June. So you'd think that'd be good for the midterms for the Democrats to sort of G them up, assuming it's against abortion. But, you know, Kavanaugh's appointment was a lot closer to the 2018 elections than that. He was in like September. And that really motivated, supposedly, conservatives. But look, maybe it affected the result of some of the red state Democrats losing their races. Like, there were 2 or 3 that lost their races in 2018. But otherwise, it didn't really come through in the polling, I don't think, on the day. So I don't know, maybe it won't make a difference in the election. I mean, that's just 2022. Who knows about, 2024 is another 2 years away. So I don't know. Where I think it would make a difference is there's 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, which have a all Republican legislature. That's gerrymandered. So it's not going to change. They're going to stay all Republican legislatures. They have Democrat governors running for re-election in 2022. So in all 3 of those states, the Democrat governor can run a legitimate, genuine, no bullshit argument that abortion is on the ballot. If you vote me out, kiss goodbye to abortion after this election. So I think that'd be a pretty powerful argument for those governors to make in Pennsylvania, Wisconsin, and Michigan. So that could have a real effect, I think, in those races. Otherwise, I don't know. You have any thoughts?
No.
Okay. All right. What I would say is that, just before we move on, that where we go from here is also an interesting question. They're definitely going to try and make abortion illegal nationally. No doubt, the pro-life people. They're going to try to have fetuses declared human beings in the court, and then say it's worthy of equal protection under the 14th Amendment. So they actually use the 14th Amendment that was being used to the same 14th Amendment that was being used to give abortion rights. They're going to try to use to take away abortion rights. That's my prediction. It seems kind of obvious. And if that doesn't work, they're going to try and pass legislatively, undoubtedly, a fetus personhood law, saying that they're declaring them as people, and so therefore making the killing of a fetus murder. They're going to try. Okay, whether that works or not, I think that'd be a big mistake if they did try to do anything like that, because until now, they've been interfering with the rights of red staters, and so it's easy for blue staters to just go, we're fine. But when they start messing with the blue staters and their personal rights, you want to motivate those guys because they are the majority of the country. We've established that the majority of the country are blue staters who often couldn't be bothered voting, they will be bothered voting if you start messing with their laws. And so I would say that's a bad call for them to do, but they're going to because they believe in it and it's part of their tribe and all the rest of it. So we'll see what happens. The only other thing I'd say is that there's a bit of fear-mongering going on the left about the next step, whether it be contraception or same-sex marriage and so forth. Oh, well, now it's going to get rid of same-sex marriage. They're not going to get rid of same-sex marriage. It was like 2 years ago, the Bostock decision. Roberts and Gorsuch didn't just endorse gay marriage, they endorsed transgender rights as well. They went way further. So they're not going to, those two aren't going to turn around and suddenly outlaw same-sex marriage when they've already gone way, way further. And that hasn't even been played out yet. That case has ramifications to come in things like, for instance, sporting competitions and things like that with transgender rights. Like we don't know how far that's played out, but it's way past same-sex marriage. So I just don't, I'll put on the record right now, I'd say 0% chance that while Gorsuch and Roberts are on the court, they are going to get rid of same-sex marriage. So we'll see. I just put that there now. That's enough now. Do you got anything else to say about abortion and all now? No, okay, all right. Let's do a stats nugget, shall we? Let's do a stats nugget.
Stats nugget.
Stats nugget. Woo! This is a bit of a depressing one. Probably shouldn't dance before this one. The CDC estimates that between May 2020 and April 2021, 100,000 Americans were killed by drug overdoses. That's the first time ever that's happened. It was a record last year with 93,000 doses and overdoses. 93,000 overdoses, drug overdoses, and they've already smashed that record the year after with 100,000. CDC says that the calendar year is going to be well over 100,000. It's still going up. So they're going to just keep on breaking their record. So because that record was between May and April, the calendar year 2021 apparently is heading for a big record. They blame, obviously, the pandemic and lockdowns. That makes sense. I guess people being depressed. They say drug users were socially isolated and barred from receiving help and treatment for their addictions. An interesting element, though, is that these overdoses, there aren't so many suicides as you might think. Now, what you just heard a second ago might suggest suicides. But in actual fact, what seems to be a big factor as well is a lot of impure and undeclared fentanyls being cut into heroin and other opioids, and it creates accidental overdoses because fentanyl is so much more powerful. There are now more overdose deaths from illegal fentanyls than there were overdose deaths from all drugs in 2016. So it's become a big deal. It's like, I don't know how they stop it, but there's the market is flooded with fentanyls which are being cut into other drugs, and then people accidentally overdose. So that is a bit of an issue. And I have nothing else to add, but just you should know because no one talks about it. So we are. All right, that's enough of that. Let's go on to the Ilhan Omar, Lauren Boebert, Taylor Green triumvirate, shall we? All right, I'll paint the scene and then we'll take it from there. Okay. Lauren Boebert had a leaked video a little while back. It was this video right here.
I was getting into an elevator with one of my staffers, and he and we're leaving the Capitol. We're going back to my office, and we get in the elevator, and I see a Capitol police officer running hurriedly to the elevator. I see fret all over his face, and he's reaching, and I'm like, what? The door's shutting. Like, I can't open it. Like, what's happening? I look to my left, and there she is. Ilhan Omar. Oops. And I said, well, she doesn't have a backpack. We should be fine. So we only had one floor to go, and I was like, do I say it? Do I not? I looked over, and I said, oh, look, the Jihad Squad decided to show up for work today. Don't worry, it's just her staffers on Twitter that talk for her. She's not tough in person. She doesn't, yes.
Ilhan Omar replied with a tweet, "Fact, this buffoon looks down when she sees me at the Capitol. This whole story is made up. Sad she thinks bigotry gets her clout. Anti-Muslim bigotry isn't funny and shouldn't be normalised. Congress can't be a place where hateful and dangerous Muslim tropes get no condemnation." And then she said, "Saying I'm a suicide bomber is no laughing matter. Kevin McCarthy and Nancy Pelosi need to take appropriate action. Normalising this bigotry not only endangers my life, but the lives of all Muslims. Anti-Muslim bigotry has no place in Congress." Okay, so first of all, this is not a one-off. This is part of Lauren Boebert's gear. If you watch that video, you saw it's very rehearsed. 2 clips have already surfaced of her doing the same story at other events. She thinks this is good material. This is her worked up material that she thinks is a killer story, right? It really showcases how bad a performer she is, by the way, because if that's rehearsed, my God, that was terribly delivered. But anyway, it also makes it twice as important, in my view, to communicate in some manner that is not on, because she thinks, not just, she didn't accidentally say it, she thinks it's great after dinner speaking material. So if you think that is unacceptable, then you need to communicate it clearly to her in some capacity, because otherwise she wouldn't know that. She thinks it's great, right? She's worked on it, okay? Then there's the thing that Omar said about the this is a threat to my life. Look, I hate that stuff generally. People saying speech equals violence, speech is a death threat. Yeah, speech is going to lead to people being killed. In this case, I think if ever you could make a case, this is the one. In that I'm sure Omar's life is in danger from crazies who are crazy about her because of the vilification of her. I'm not sure that story in particular would have G'd them up, but there's no doubt in my mind that the anti-Muslim vilification of Omar is part of the reason she has so many death threats. And I would not put it past one of those crazies to act on it. So, I mean, I don't like people going to, oh, this will cost lives, but that's not great. And it's part of a kind of rhetoric, which in my view is really not great.
And the story itself, even though, it's obvious to us that she's joking, is portraying her as a threat to security.
Yeah.
And some people are probably dumb enough to think that that's a real story. So even if you, I can understand why Omar would find that very threatening, because she's being depicted as a threat to a bunch of crazies.
Yeah. And it's so obviously not true as well. Like, I didn't need Ilhan Omar to tell us that's not true. I mean, what, a security guard is going to rush to the elevator going, no, because Ilhan Omar is in the elevator? That's what she's implying with that stupid story. It's clearly not true. And as if Boebert would say that line about the jihad squad in an elevator by herself with Ilhan Omar. I mean, she can barely tell that story. She's so timid in her delivery. Like, it's just, oh, come on. It's so unconvincing. But anyway, what else? What are your thoughts?
Congress people who are arguably legitimate threats to the Capitol, and it's not the squad. It's people like Boebert who encourage the insurrectionists.
Yeah. So do you have any other thoughts about the original before we get into the spin-offs? Do you have any thoughts about the original interaction there?
I agree with you. It's gross and lame.
Yeah. It's I was going to say my personal view is that the committee assignments thing, they keep on trying to take committee assignments off these people. That is being defined down daily these days about the bar required to clear. And it's so obvious that we're getting to a place where they're going to constantly take committee assignments off each other now when whoever's in the majority, and it's going to be meaningless. I still think the most appropriate way to communicate this is not on is by public shaming, which is what happened in this case. And she apologized. It actually worked briefly. That's like she was publicly shamed. No one likes being a punching bag. And this takes us to the next step, which was Boebert tweeted out an apology. She tweeted out, I apologize to anyone in the Muslim community I offended with my comment about Rep Omar. I have reached out to office to speak with her directly. There are plenty of policy differences to focus on without this unnecessary distraction. That's fair enough. That's a reasonable apology. Using the distraction line, that's what people do to save face. We all know how this works. But she actually accepted that it wasn't good and that she took it back. And you know what? That's all we're going to get from Boebert. Like, I'm not expecting anything else. If you get that, if you just get people accepting that a line was crossed and withdrawing the crossing of that line, I don't know what else you could expect. Like, that's the best you're going to get. And if that gets solidified a few times, then you got a line. You got an actual line that even the Boeberts don't cross, and that would be beautiful in my view. But it then moved on, and it's Boebert made a terrible mistake at that point in time, which was she tried to reach out to Ilhan Omar for a personal conversation. Ilhan Omar rang her back, and they had an unchaperoned interaction. Two people whose entire persona is built around fighting, inverted commas, fighting, had an unchaperoned interaction, and of course, it went off the rails. And this is what Boebert's side of the story is.
Now, as a strong Christian woman who values faith deeply, I never want anything I say to offend someone's religion. So I told her that, even after I put out a public statement to that effect. She said that she still wanted a public apology because what I had done wasn't good enough. So I reiterated to her what I had just said. She kept asking for a public apology. So I told Ilhan Omar that she should make a public apology to the American people for her anti-American, anti-Semitic, anti-police rhetoric. She continued to press, and I continued to press back. And then Representative Omar hung up on me. Rejecting an apology and hanging up on someone is part of cancel culture 101 and a pillar of the Democrat Party. Make no mistake, I will continue to fearlessly put America first, never sympathizing with terrorists. Unfortunately, Ilhan can't say the same thing, and our country is worse off for it. Please know I appreciate you and your support. I appreciate you understanding that I will always shoot straight with you. This isn't about religion. It's about the horrible, failed Democrat policies and anti-Americanism that I will call out each and every time I hear it.
Now, I should say that Ilhan Omar doesn't really dispute that account that Lauren Boebert gave there. So I think we can basically assume that she's vaguely telling the truth there. All I want to draw your attention to, though, Melina, is, do you notice, by the way, how differently she speaks when she's speaking by herself to a camera than when she's speaking on stage? Like, when she's on stage, she's all tentative and nervous and shy, but when, like, all these nervous little giggles and looking down at the ground and stuff. When she's talking to a camera, she's all angry and strident and proud, and like it's just she's always yelling and angry when she's speaking to a camera, all, you know, full of tough talk. But when she's speaking to a person, she's a very, very different person, which is the other reason why I'm absolutely sure that story is not true, that her supposedly saying this to Ilhan Omar. But anyway, I do feel like, yeah, Lauren Boebert did make baby steps there to try and apologise to Ilhan Omar in a way. And I do feel like Ilhan Omar should have reciprocated the baby steps by just accepting her semi-apology and just moving on, rather than demanding a public accounting, which she was never going to get from Lauren Boebert. But, you know, like, it's just, I suppose, like I said, when those two get together, it was never going to end well. What's your take on it all?
I would say it's not cancel culture if someone hangs up the phone on you in a private conversation. That is so stupid.
Yes.
Have to talk to someone you don't want to talk to.
And it's not calling out anti-Americanism when you accuse a Muslim person of being a terrorist either. That's not calling out anti-Americanism at all. Like, there is no one out there who's serious, who is seriously suggesting that Ilhan Omar herself is a terrorist. Like, the most negative a serious person says about Ilhan Omar is that she supports funding programs that may be used for terrorism. That is, I mean, I'm not saying it's true, but that's the knock on that. That's what some people say. No one says she straps on suicide belts and walks into Congress with them. Like, no one's suggesting that. So it's not exactly calling out anti-Americanism when you suggested that. But anyway, just leave all that aside. Before we move into the main part of the stoush, which is all leading, do you have anything else to say about everything else so far? No. Okay. All right. This led to the main part of the stoush, which it doesn't even involve Ilhan Omar. In fact, it doesn't even involve Lauren Boebert. It involves two other people who have just piggybacked on. Marjorie Taylor Greene first tweeted out, "Democrats want us censored, shut down and imprisoned. Never apologize to Islamic terrorist sympathizers, communists, or those who fund murder with our tax dollars. Ilhan Omar and the Jihad Squad are all three and are undeserving of an apology." And then Nancy Mace went on CNN and said this.
I have time after time condemned my colleagues on both sides of the aisle for racist tropes and remarks that I find disgusting. And this is no different than any others. As a member of Congress and seeing such division in our country, we all have a responsibility, both elected members of Congress on both sides of the aisle and the American people in our communities and at work, in our communities and everything else, we have a responsibility to lower the temperature. And this does not do that. I didn't come to Congress to throw bombs on Twitter, to take advantage of people by saying crazy things to raise money, or to be a comedian. I'll leave comedy to Dave Chappelle. I was disappointed in the comments. I was encouraged to see that she did apologize for the comments, and I believe that's a step in the right direction. But I do know as a Republican, I get threats. I carry a gun now, Caitlin, because of the threats that I get from the fringes of both parties right now. And we've got to do our part to lower the temperature and try to work together. Again, another lesson I learned as part of this bipartisan CODEL, when we work together, America is stronger on the world stage. And quite frankly, our world needs that right now because of the aggression we see from places like China and Russia. And so I've been very vocal even on this network, these kinds of things. But as a Republican too, I know that even when I've disagreed with some on the left, I know Republicans are blanketed as white supremacists, and I know that's not right either. And so I encourage people on both sides of the aisle to take a pause and maybe step away from Facebook and social media and really think about how our words have consequences.
Okay, now I played the entire grab on purpose to show you that it was complete verbal diarrhea. Her answer was just gibberish. She's a kind of a centrist. She's what passes for a centrist amongst Republicans these days in the House. And it's part of her brand to just use all those phrases, reaching across the aisle, lowering the temperature, getting along, whatever. They just like, I didn't come in to throw bombs, etc., etc., etc. Like it was just centrist Mad Libs, just throwing phrases together and just this complete mess that I don't even know what she said. But the important thing is she was expressing disapproval like you're meant to when you're a centrist, and she was doing it in the in the dullest possible way. Like, she was not trying to cut through. She did not have a pre-prepared phrase that she was trying to smash in Boebert's face. She was just answering a question by thinking, oh, I should talk kind of centristy. And that's what she did, right? No one had to pick her up on it. No one had to do anything. They just left it there. But Marjorie Taylor Greene wanted to make it a thing, clearly, because she went out of her way to pick that grab and to go on Twitter and have a go at Nancy Mace about it. And this is probably unfinished business because Nancy Mace had a go at Marjorie Taylor Greene when she had that Holocaust controversy earlier in the year, accusing everyone of being like the Holocaust. Anyway. And
they've also been sniping in the freshman congressman group chat from the very beginning since they first got into Congress. So
there we go. There we go. Okay, so at this point in time, Melina, I feel like we should bring this exchange to life because it's going to go on for a little while. I know you've got the tweets like I've got them because we're going to talk about this. I'm happy to play Marjorie Taylor Greene if you're happy to play Nancy Mace. So you willing to take the challenge?
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, so let's start off. Marjorie Taylor Greene, this is all on Twitter. Nancy Mace is the trash in the GOP conference. Never attacked by Democrats or rhinos. Same thing, because she's not conservative. She's pro-abort. Mace, you can back up off of Lauren Boebert or just go hang with your real gal pals, the Jihad Squad. You're, Y-O-U-R, out of your league. And then Nancy Mace said,
star your Y-O-U apostrophe R-E. And while I'm correcting you, I'm a pro-life fiscal conservative who was attacked by the left all weekend, as I often am, as I defied China while in Taiwan. What I'm not is a religious bigot or racist. You might want to try that over there in your little league.
And then she followed up with,
this is what bat emoji, shit emoji, clown emoji looks like.
so batshit crazy. And then someone else wrote to Nancy Mace, this is getting lost in the conversation, but the reason why Marjorie Taylor Greene is saying Nancy Mace is pro-abort is because Mace was raped in high school and as a result wants exemptions from abortion bans for rape and incest, which many anti-abortion conservatives also support. And Mace wrote,
so she retweeted that and said, added, this was a devastating and life-changing traumatic event. I had no hope for the future, turned to drugs and alcohol, dropped out of school and never thought I'd make it. Beyond disgusted.
And also at this point in time, I need to add that Marjorie Taylor Greene had a completely different stash a few days earlier and had finished it off by saying that she spoke, I just got off a good call with Kevin McCarthy. We spent time talking about solving problems, not only in the conference, but for our country. I liked what he has planned ahead. And so then as part of this spree, Nancy Mace also tweeted,
I just got off a good call with @GOP leader, aka Kevin McCarthy.
Yep.
We spent time talking about solving problems, not only in the conference, but for our country. I like what he has planned ahead.
So she wrote exactly word for word what Marjorie Taylor Greene said before, being a bit of a smart ass. So that's 4 responses to 1 tweet. Mace didn't need to make a thing of it either, but she wanted to. They both wanted to make a thing out of it, right? So then Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted, just had a great conversation with President Trump about Nancy Mace. I absolutely love President Trump. He's our leader. And so Nancy Mace tweeted,
don't look now, but it's MTG unable to take the heat, running to the principal's office to tattletale because she can't stand on her own 2 feet. Bless her heart.
Oh dear. And then Nancy Mace followed up with,
I like my freshman colleagues who don't think 9/11 was a hoax. This one, on the other hand, totally Peanuts icon.
Once again, going on with it further than she needs to. So then Marjorie Taylor Greene goes on talk radio and slags Mace off. Nancy Mace is an absolute disgrace. I'm tired of Republicans like her. And she continued on. There was another Nancy Mace controversy about her going CNN and saying one thing and her going Fox and saying something slightly different. And Marjorie Taylor Greene included that video and then said, everything wrong with Nancy Mace. She lies, she flips and flops depending on who she's talking to. Hashtag two-faced Mace. Once you do the hashtag, that is a big deal in populist world. Anyway, and then she continued on, Marjorie Taylor Greene. There are a lot of people that need to hear this. We conservatives in the House GOP aren't the fringe. We actually represent the base of Republican voters, which is approximately 70%. When the party learns to represent conservative Americans, we will never lose again. All the so-called political experts always push Republicans to the middle to get the swing voters. All that has done is create the uni party, which has led us to this disaster. Do you know why Trump is the most popular Republican in history? Because he appeals to the common man and woman. You can't fool them. They see through the bullshitters. When Republicans learn how to truly represent the workers, traditional families, and restore rural America with America First policies, then the party will earn their vote. Okay? Kevin McCarthy then gets them into a room, says, enough of this. Please stop sniping at each other. Greene walks out the meeting, immediately starts telling a reporter that she supports a primary challenge against Mace. Mace leaves the meeting, immediately says to reporters, all I can say about, this is you.
All I can say about Marjorie Taylor Greene is bless her fucking heart.
There we go. There we go. Wonderful impression of Nancy Mace there. Wow. Someone tweeted that and Mace retweeted it with,
here for it.
There we go. Once again, didn't need to do that. Then Marjorie Taylor Greene tweeted about supporting exceptions for rape and incest again about Nancy Mace, and said, like I said, Nancy Mace is pro-abortion. Protecting abortion is pro-abortion. No baby should be removed for any reason. Hashtag two-faced Mace. And then Nancy Mace went and talked back. She said she's a grifter. She lies to grift. It's not okay. She's pulling the wool over so many eyes, so many vulnerable people, lying to them like she's fighting for them. She hasn't done a damn thing since she got into office. Okay, that's the stoush, Melina. What do you think?
First of all, people who say the Republican Party is stuck in the 50s with rising stars called Nancy and Marjorie, it's kind of hard to disagree. It's a very big conflict all the way through. Like I said before, they have been griping ever since they got to Congress, but Nancy Mace is kind of an interesting one, especially in relationship to Trump, because she's been a little bit all over the place. So she worked on his 2016 campaign. I should say she's a congresswoman from South Carolina, first term, and in a bit of a purple district. So even though South Carolina is generally a red state, her particular seat has gone Democrat in the recent past. So she has some incentive to kind of play a bit more centrist at times. But in terms of her relationship with Trump, she worked on his 2016 campaign. Then after the January 6th attack, she said Trump put all our lives at risk, and she didn't object to certifying Biden's victory. So she was kind of staking herself on the side of the anti-Trump people, but then she voted against impeachment. She supported Liz Cheney originally before reluctantly voting to remove her. And then she started toning down her criticism of Trump when it kind of became obvious that the party wasn't moving on from him. So she was backtracking a bit, sort of seeming to get in line behind him again. More recently, she voted to hold Steve Bannon in contempt, but her argument as to why was because she didn't want to remove a power that Republicans will have if they, or soon get to wield if they retake the House, which makes sense, but it's still not the vote that the pro-Trump people were supposed to be making. So she's still copping hate for that. They're still Trump is still encouraging her to be primaried. So she has got him offside. And she's been fighting on and off with Greene since they were both elected, but she seems to be becoming bolder again and criticizing not just Marjorie Taylor Greene, but also, Lauren Boebert, and more broadly, that kind of Trumpy, in the case of the Ilan stuff, like racist, conspiracy theories, those kinds of things. So kind of staking out a claim again as being a bigger moderate voice within the party. The thing that's interesting to me about it, other than it being a messy public drama, which is always kind of fun, is that I feel like Nancy sort of back and forth on her approach to Trump is just like another indication of people within the Republican Party trying to figure out how to get beyond Trump. You've talked a lot in the past about Republican voters still want him, but the politicians, of course, don't, because their careers, they're all ambitious people and all their careers are completely on hold until they can get him out of the way. So everyone is quietly trying to figure out, how do we get this guy's voters, but get him off the scene? And I feel like Nancy's latest sort of snoushes are kind of representing a bit of a diversification of the beyond Trump strategies, because obviously Glenn Youngkin in Virginia had success by presenting himself as that more traditional Romney-esque Republican. I'm a boring businessman, standard kind of conservative. He avoided campaigning with Trump. He tried to win by appealing to suburban voters that voted Democrat in the past because they don't like Trump. So, really trying to distance himself in the way that he presented himself and kind of running a mile from being too heavily associated with all the MAGA people. Whereas I feel like Nancy Mace is trying that strategy of fighting back and fighting more directly with the MAGA people, trying to take them on head on. And, I know you've often commented in the past about how Trump voters love politicians who kind of fight. And so the question is, will that approach, like being that kind of combative personality, work for her if she's fighting against people like Greene and Boebert? You could say that the precedent of Liz Cheney aggressively fighting Trump would suggest it's a bad move. But I feel like it is a little bit different in the sense that potentially the mistake that Liz Cheney made was taking on Trump directly. She was fighting with Trump very publicly, and that obviously went very badly for her. Whereas for Nancy Mace, she's sort of not taking on Trump. She's trying to avoid engaging with Trump directly, fighting with him directly. And even though she is pissing him off by fighting with his bigger supporters indirectly, I do feel like people like Marjorie Taylor Greene and Lauren Boebert are significantly weaker targets, and potentially a way to kind of present yourself as a fighter and a kind of interesting person who's getting headlines and attention, while also sort of drawing a little bit of a line between yourself and the fringiest elements of the party without directly antagonizing Trump. And she has supported Trump in the past. So it's not like she is such a moderate that, you know, she finds him totally anathema and can't point to things in her resume to suggest, in the way that Glenn Youngkin kind of never repudiated Trump, even though he was clearly trying to create distance, was quite successful. So that's kind of what's interesting to me about it, that I think you're seeing the emergence of different approaches from different kinds of politicians as to how they're going to create some separation without having Trump turn on them and alienate them from all of his voters who they desperately want to try and pick up.
I think that's a really interesting observation, that that Nancy Mace is using the techniques of the pro-Trumpers to try and win a purple district in a centrist way, which is really, that's a really interesting observation. I think that's true. There is another difference between Nancy Mace and Liz Cheney, obviously, in that Liz Cheney is in the reddest state in the world, and Nancy Mace is in the purple district. So I think Republicans would know. I think establishment Republicans wouldn't really give a toss about Liz Cheney, but they would be pretty keen to keep Nancy Mace as the Republican nominee, because they would think they don't have a chance of winning that district if they get a MAGA head in there in 2022 in the primary, which is inevitably going to come. So I think there's as well. I think that's a good observation. I would also say that I'm not at all surprised that the two of them got into this clash, because like I said, they both clearly wanted it. It's in both their identities and both their interests to have this fight. Nancy Mace is defining herself in opposition to the Marjorie Taylor Greens. Marjorie Taylor Greene is defining herself in opposition to the Rhinos. They're both doing the fight strategy, so it actually works to both their benefits for this fight to happen, which is why both of them were pushing for it as much as they possibly could. And then fighting's easy. That's the thing. It requires nothing but a lack of dignity. And if they had dignity, they wouldn't be politicians. So, achieving something is hard. Fighting's simple. Fighting, achieving nothing, and then just return to your corners before you fight again with someone else. It's very easy. So they can keep on doing this forever. And I think they will. Normally, though, you don't like to carry on like that, because it's not in the electoral interests of your party, or you for that matter, normally. But all I'd add is I read a really interesting article by Jonathan Bernstein, which I'll put in the homework. I'll make a note of that, about something else entirely, actually, but I think it relates to this, which is, I'll just read you the quote. It's a bit of a lengthy quote, but it's a good one. Politicians want to win and then retain office. Campaign professionals want to win to improve their reputations and perhaps to reap financial rewards. Governing professionals want to win so that they can govern. Activists and donors want to win so they can influence policy. And in some cases, because they too want jobs when the party is in office. With almost all individual incentives running that way, the party collectively comes to place a high priority on winning, generally. But party-aligned media do not necessarily share that incentive. Being out of office is good for business because negative partisanship means more viewers and more clicks when there's an opposite party president dislike. Normally, party-aligned media aren't important enough within a party for their commercial interests to overwhelm the party's political ones. So its members tend to follow the lead of politicians and campaign professionals, both because access to them is important and because party actors generally adopt the goal of winning elections. However, what we've seen lately with the Republican Party, the more central party aligned the media become within the overall party, the less important winning becomes. And then second order problems kick in. As Fox News and conservative talk radio become more popular and more profitable, Republican politicians and other party actors are more likely to think of them as a viable career goal, and therefore replace their own electoral incentives with reasons to act as outrageous as possible. I would add to that as well that conservative media creates electoral success for Republicans as well. So their electoral interests are not served by doing what once was in their electoral interests. Their actual electoral interests are served by committing what seem to be electorally suicidal acts, because that helps them with conservative media, which makes them more likely to actually win. And so I'd say put that point with Jonathan Bernstein's point to say the incentives are misaligned compared to what they used to be. The incentive now is to be a dick. The incentive is to be a troll. The incentive is to fight. And so I think increasingly we're going to see more of the circus act from politicians, because that's where especially in the Republican Party, because that's where their interests are aligned with conservative media. Like mainstream media does not share those interests, does not share the same tone as conservative media. So the Democrats don't have the same interests, electoral interests, as the Republicans do. So that's why there's a difference between the parties, in my view. So what does this mean, if that's right? Number one, that means fighting is good. Always fight, fight, fight. Number two, in all but the rarest circumstances, being more extreme and more purist is good. Nancy Mace may be one of those extreme circumstances, rare circumstances, because she's in such a purple district. It's like a 50-50 district. Three, conspiracies are good as well, because that plays into that, because that's great for conservative media. Conspiracies, they love that stuff, and that plays into why Republicans might be willing to play footsie with anti-vaxxers. More on that in a second. I'll get to that when we talk about COVID. But that's my takeaway from this whole thing. This is a little milestone on the path to more and more circus, more and more Barnum and Bailey from Republicans, because the conservative media is dominating their electoral interests, in my view. You have any thoughts?
I would just add, in terms of the incentives, like the way this sort of behavior is incentivized these days, because media is so fragmented and there's so much information, even just beyond the news, in terms of, all of the internet does so much content, so much choice everywhere for us now. It's hard to cut through. And how does a random congresswoman from South Carolina cut through? By creating a controversy, creating headlines. So, Marjorie Taylor Greene, obviously expert at creating controversy, and therefore that's how we know who she is. And I know who Nancy Mace is now because she picked a fight with Marjorie Taylor Greene. I will confess, I did not know who she was before this happened. So, in terms of cutting through just all the noise out there and grabbing people's attention, usually the easiest way to do that is by doing something outlandish or doing something extreme, because otherwise, why would you pay attention over all the other things coming at you day to day? Yeah. So I think that's another way that our current landscape incentivizes more extreme and fringe behavior.
Yeah, that's spot on. Okay, let's go on to COVID. There's plenty to talk about here. First of all, there's a new variant. We talked about this at length on the show. Oh my God, did we ever. A few points I didn't cover though, so I will cover them. But first of all, I'll let you kick off. Do you have any thoughts about, or any points you want to make about Omicron? I always have trouble saying Omicron. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Not in favor of it.
I think it's generally a bad thing. Well, one of the arguments out there is it might be a good thing. It might be a good thing because, maybe if it turns out to be less dangerous but more infective, then it will spread and outcompete Delta, and people won't die because it's a lamer virus. There is an argument out there that is how the common cold evolved. It used to be the Russian flu, which was 200 years ago and deadly, and then a variant of the Russian flu evolved, which spread much easier, but was just the sniffles, and that was the common cold. So, and then spread everywhere around the world. So that is an argument. I don't know if that's true, but that's an argument that people say. And there's the hope out there that Omicron might be that for COVID, or at least a step along that path. I don't know. Do you want me to start rattling on, and then you can jump in when you like? Okay, all right. Well, firstly, one thing which we didn't mention on the show, which I want to ask your opinion on, Melina, is the name Omicron. They skipped two names to get to Omicron. They skipped two words in the alphabet. They skipped Nu and they skipped Z. WHO says that Nu is too easily confused with the word new. Okay, fair enough. Z they skipped, they say, because it's a common last name in China, saying the agency's, quote, best practices for naming diseases suggest avoiding causing offence to any cultural, social, national, regional, professional, or ethnic groups. Now, conservatives have pointed out that Mu is a more common last name in China than Z is. And they didn't skip past Mu, but they did skip past Z. And there's a suggestion that's clearly, it's about really not offending Xi Jinping. I would say that's obviously the case. That's, like, no one's kidding anyone about that one. But I would argue, who cares? Like if it was a Trump variant, like they'd try and avoid, if Trump was the next word along in the alphabet, they wouldn't name it that either, because they wouldn't want to piss him off either. You don't go around pissing off hot-headed world leaders for no reason. Like, seems common sense to me. Why would they go out of their way to troll the Chinese leader? Like, how is that in anyone's benefit? So it just seems like common sense to me. What about you?
Yeah, I agree. And the argument that, it's to avoid confusion, I think it is slightly confusing if you name variants after world leaders. It's the same. The whole point of using letters of the Greek alphabet is to not name it after countries, so that you're not stigmatizing countries. And if you create the perception that you're naming it after world leaders, it kind of defeats the point. So, I mean, yeah, I agree. That's obviously why, and I don't care.
Yeah, totally. Okay, so Omicron really is taking off in South Africa. South Africa's COVID cases doubled in one day a few days back, from 4,373 cases in one day to 8,561 cases the next day. Having said that, they're not all Omicron. They're just going through a spike, but Omicron's certainly part of it. Also, importantly, the South African wave might be adding cases faster than previous waves, which it is, but hospitalizations are just on the same path that they were for previous waves, which suggests that it's less virulent, Also, it could be, the other thing is with Omicron, if we're watching South Africa as an example, they're only 24% vaccinated, fully vaccinated. At least they were last week. So they're probably not a great comparison for countries like America or Australia or Europe, for that matter. This has, though, led to a lot of discussion about first world shots versus third world shots, because this is exactly the prediction of health bodies months ago, saying if we don't get vaccinations out to places like Africa, poor places around the world, there will be variants evolved in those areas, and they will find their way to the rich countries. So you do not cure COVID until you cure COVID everywhere. Until you cure COVID everywhere, you're wasting your time. You can boost yourself up all you like in America, but you will get the variant if we don't stop it everywhere. So get those vaccines out to the poor countries. And now it appears, I'll say more about this in a second, but it appears as if that Omicron may have evolved in Africa, just like predicted. And so there's a bit of you see going on from health bodies. Do you have thoughts about that? No, okay. There are some numbers out there about this. The WHO said that there are about 28.5 million COVID vaccine doses a day at the moment. 7 million of them are boosters, so about a quarter are boosters. 1.1 million are primary doses in low-income countries. So there are 6 times as many boosters going out per day as there are original vaccines in poor countries. So they go, well, that's a problem. But what I would say, also only 4.5% of people in low-income countries have received at least one dose of a coronavirus vaccine at this point in time. That's not many, but it's not so simple as saying, rich countries are hogging all the vaccines. I mean, they are, but it's not just that. 5 out of the 8 countries in Africa that with Omicron at the moment, that there were travel advisories for and stuff, they asked to pause vaccine deliveries before Omicron because their stocks were full, including South Africa. So they've got vaccine hesitancy problems, big time vaccine hesitancy problems. And so, yes, it'd be great to get more vaccines out, but I don't think that's going to solve the problem. I think the problem is we need to work out a way to get these people to vaccinate themselves, like once they've got the vaccines.
There's also major logistical issues in terms of the vaccines that need to be refrigerated, and areas with lack of consistent refrigeration all across Africa in particular.
Absolutely. And the one that particularly does not require a lot of refrigeration is Johnson & Johnson, which is the one which everyone's scared of. So that doesn't help either. Obviously, we're waiting to see how bad this is still. Like there's South African doctors, which we talked about on the show, saying we're not seeing any bad cases so far. We're just seeing mild symptoms. The CDC in Europe say 50% of the cases they've seen outside South Africa have been asymptomatic, no symptoms. And the other 50% have just been mild symptoms. They haven't seen any severe symptoms yet from CDC Europe. So yeah, maybe it might be that Russian flu example, maybe not, I don't know. Early Pfizer vaccine results suggest that it's just slightly less effective in preventing infection with Omicron and Delta, 90% compared to 95%. I said these numbers on the show, but these are the only numbers we got. And it's the same amount of effectiveness keeping people out of hospitals. So it's preventing serious symptoms, which is 93% apparently in the trials so far. I think that's from Israel. So yeah, we'll see what happens there. They're all early results. I think one way or another, it's out. It's definitely out. The Dutch, the Belgians, and the Germans have all found Omicron in cases dating back before they were discovered in Africa. Before. So that's why I say it might not have evolved in Africa. It might have evolved elsewhere and then gone to Africa and gone to Europe. We just don't know. But definitely it's out in Europe. America, same thing. The second case in America, first case in California, that was someone who traveled. The second case was someone who didn't travel. It was in Minnesota, and they first got sick before it was officially declared in Africa as well. And that was in America. And that guy found mild symptoms. He hadn't traveled at all. And he found mild symptoms on November 22. Between November 19 and November 21, he was in New York City attending a convention, an anime convention that had 46,000 people attend in 2019, according to his website. So we don't know how many people were there this time, but it would have been thousands of people. He was there the day before he showed symptoms. So I think it's out. It's one way or another. We know America isn't ready. If there is a big pandemic, and if there is a big variant and it is dangerous, it does turn out to be dangerous, which we don't know. It's America, the biggest problem it has at the moment is no rapid tests. This has been a problem the whole time. Their rapid tests are expensive and hard to get. Biden pumped out 280 million freebies under the Defense Protection Act. Well, that's less than one per person. You need to do constant rapid tests. And so they cost like $20 a pop if you can get them in America. Now they're going to issue more freebies, but they're not going to be freebies. You have to pay for them, and then you get reimbursed from your insurance company. I mean, when you have to go through those kinds of problems, it's going to be a huge disincentive for people to buy them. But anyway, they're also making booster shots available for everyone as well. There's a study out there I mentioned on the show about boosters. They way better than second shot. In terms of antibody level in this study, albeit a small study, like we're talking like 33 boosted people. It's not many, but still. The median level of their antibodies was 23 times higher the week after the booster than it was the week before the booster. It was 3 times higher than just after the second shot. The antibodies of the third shot were 3 times higher than just after the antibodies of the second shot. And compared to a group of 73 people who had gotten COVID and been vaccinated twice, their antibodies were still 68% higher with the booster shot. So it works.
Funny because of the messaging on vaccines, by saying, boosters and for third shots, it makes it sound a little bit like, it's not that effective as a vaccine. Like, oh, it runs out, you have to get more. But there are lots of vaccines, like normal vaccines that we've had for ages, that are 3-shot vaccines.
Totally.
And so COVID might just be a 3-shot vaccine.
It might. absolutely. It might. It's do you have anything else to say about Omicron before we move on to more COVID stuff? No. Okay. It's not just America that's struggling a little bit with the rapid testing and so forth, though, because there are big cases at the moment, big case spikes at the moment in Germany, Austria, Belgium, Netherlands, Greece, Eastern Europe. Basically, most of Europe is just coming off a spike at the moment. Interestingly, two countries that haven't had much of a spike, Spain and Portugal, two of the most vaccinated countries in the world. I'm not saying anything, just anyway. Just sort of general vaccine stuff before we move on to vaccine mandates. Couple of things. First of all, interesting polls from Monmouth. The people who say they'd likely never get the vaccine, in March, it was 24% of people. In June, it was 21% of people. In July, it was 17% of people. In September, it was 15% of people. In November, it's 13% of people. Now, America is still 41% not fully vaccinated. So I don't know how that works, but the numbers are moving in the right direction at the very least. But one of those more worrying is that a poll I saw, stat I saw, which I found a bit more disturbing. It was from Harry Enton about anti-vaccination moving the opposite way, moving from COVID to other stuff. He noted that there didn't used to be a partisan gap in flu vaccinations between Democrats and Republicans until last year. Now there's a 24-point partisan vaccine gap in flu, very similar to the 30-point partisan COVID vaccine gap. So now that may be people just aren't getting flu vaccines because they just got a COVID vaccine and they think, oh, what's the point? But the Democrats are getting them. So Republicans aren't. So
that's the thing that I think is scary about a lot of people in trying to advocate for people to get the COVID vaccine, make the argument of, we have vaccine mandates for schools for like measles vaccines and things like that. And it's, I think, a good argument, but the risk by raising that argument is that you have the opposite effect of what you want, which is rather than convince people to get the COVID vaccine because they're already getting these other ones, you potentially put the idea in, certain Republicans' heads that they should be against all the other vaccines as well, which is obviously not the direction they want to be heading.
No, I'm not surprised to hear this because we're seeing it live. The arguments being used by Republicans are equating vaccine mandates with the end of freedom. And that argument applies for measles and mumps and all the rest of it as well. So it's by the way, talking about partisan stuff, take a guess where New York is now on the list of accumulated COVID deaths per capita. Okay, so COVID deaths per capita accumulated. So this counts all the ones right at the beginning when no one knew what was happening and they had frozen trucks driving around the city with corpses in it, like when it was completely just a mess. No vaccines, hospitals overrun, all the rest of it. We count all those deaths. Where do you think New York ranks in the list in America for accumulated COVID deaths per capita?
I think they've dropped down quite a lot, like maybe in the middle, 25.
Not that far. I probably built it up too much. It's number 9. They're number 9 now. The list is Alabama, New Jersey, Louisiana, Arizona, Arkansas, Florida, Georgia, New York, Oklahoma. That's the top 10.
I mean, it's not surprising because there's been, like, New York, because it's such a dense city full of so many people, had the conditions for it to spread a lot in a short period of time at the beginning, but there's been time now for it to spread to more like decentralized communities, which you find more in the red states, like rural and sort of outer suburban areas.
That is true, but still I'm amazed because there was so much loss of life early on. But and in a big city, that's a lot of loss of life. But seems number 9, with whatever the opposite of a bullet is, a falling bullet. Anyway, another vaccine-related thing, natural immunity. I spoke a few weeks back. I know I've talked to you about this on GChat. I spoke a few weeks back about natural immunity and about how, in my view, what would be great would be to test antibodies rather than just have a vaccination certificate. And if you have enough antibodies, that's your pass. If you don't have enough antibodies, you should go and get vaccinated, or you should go and whatever. And yeah, because I felt like, natural immunity, still immunity. Like I agree with the Republicans. I agree with DeSantis when he says natural immunity should count. I think it should count. A very predictable thing has happened though in that regard. It was very predictable. This is in Italy where
they predicted it.
Yeah. No, I didn't predict it, but it is predictable.
No, I predicted it.
Oh, you predicted it. Yes, you did. You did. Over in Italy, I'm an Italian background. I think like an Italian apparently, because they have exactly the system I described. Where you need a green pass to go to work, go inside bars and restaurants, ride public transport, but you get a green pass if you've been vaccinated or if you got COVID in the last 6 months. Okay, they don't test antibodies, but yeah, same principle. If you got COVID in the last 6 months, you can prove you got COVID in the last 6 months, you get a green pass. Okay, so it's a vaccination and natural immunity. That's the system in Italy. So what happened? Well, people have gone and got themselves not vaccinated, but sick. A prosecutor in northern Italian province of Bolzano has opened up an investigation because someone died of COVID after going to a COVID party to deliberately get sick. These COVID parties, they're one of two kinds of parties. So they gather in outdoor areas of bars where they're allowed to mix, but then they all drink each other's glasses and stuff so they can catch COVID off each other. They pass the bottle around and all. I don't know if they actually like spig in each other's bottles or whatever, but they just drink out of the same bottles. Or there's a private home parties where people with COVID come on purpose there and they mingle and kiss and hug the unvaccinated in order to spread the virus. There was one case, apparently, I don't know, I saw no evidence of this, but apparently there was one evidence where an infected person was bedridden and the guests gathered around the sick bed trying to breathe in the virus, wafting the person's breath towards them. I don't know if that's true. Look, dickheads always make it hard for you in these circumstances. They really do. I haven't changed my mind, but God, I mean, what are you going to do? Like, it's a damned if you do, damned if you don't scenario.
Yeah, I agreed with your point in theory that it should count natural immunity. And yeah, I did, see this coming, that this was going to happen. And even though I did predict it was going to happen, I was still surprised when I finally did see it that anyone could be that incredibly stupid. But of course, plenty of people are. And the sad thing is, like, at least one kid has ended up in hospital as a result of this like deliberate infection with COVID, which is obviously beyond fucked when people are deliberately exposing their kids to COVID and then they're ending up in hospital. So yeah, it's just, I don't understand how anyone could think that getting actually sick would be better than getting a vaccine to stop you getting sick, but it happens.
It does, sadly. I mean, just one other random thing. I've expressed my annoyance at the CDC and the FDA a number of times on this podcast, who I think are are occasionally incompetent. There's been a freedom of information request from some activists about the data that went into the Pfizer vaccine. Yes, I know these people are probably pains in the asses, but they deserve to have a look at the data. Like, that's fair enough. That's how it works. You make freedom of information requests, you get information. Okay, that's how America is meant to work. That's how Australia is meant to work. This is public information, so you're meant to get the public information. Okay, sure. And they're going to respond. They're going to respond in 55 years. They literally, the CDC has literally responded with a letter saying we will satisfy this request in 55 years, in an estimated 55 years time. So I don't think they're putting their best foot forward, the CDC. I really don't. I think they could do a better job of winning over the American populace. I know these people in particular are probably hard to win over, But I feel like they could try a little bit harder than that. Anyway, I am very conscious of the time. We've got about 15 minutes with you here, Melina. We got still heaps. So what I'm going to do is let's cover the China one. So I know you got a bit to say about that one, the China one, and then I will do a relatively short Unleashed afterwards with a goodbye for the year, and maybe we'll get to that. We'll get to that anyway, because there's a lot to go. Let's talk China, shall we? Now, in particular, I'd like to focus on a tennis player, Peng Shuai, a famous tennis player. Did you know of her before? Was she that famous or not?
She's more of a doubles player, which I don't follow as closely as singles tennis. But
you are into tennis, I know that.
Yeah. I am into tennis, yes.
Yes. Okay. Well, should I tell the story or should you tell the story?
You go.
I do. Okay. All right. She wrote a long, jump in whenever you want, Melina. She wrote a long social media post in which, this is back in November 2, I think, from memory. She claimed she had an on-again, off-again affair with a vice premier, Zhang Gaoli, who was married. Now, she said she had an affair before he rose up the party ranks and became vice premier. About 3 years ago, after Zhang retired from his role, he invited her over to his house to play tennis with him and his wife. She said he then sexually assaulted her while his wife stood outside guarding the door, which is a bit weird, but that's not the point. That post was then deleted 20 minutes later. She then disappeared. No social media, no responding to emails or calls, no nothing. Now, I didn't say physically disappeared. She might have been hiding out in her house. We don't know, but at least online, she disappeared after that for over 2 weeks. Hashtags started. The Women's Tennis Association was making noises. Where's she gone? What's going on? And then state media, CGTN, published an email that Peng supposedly sent to the WTA. This is the email she supposedly sent to the WTA head. Stephen Simon, I think his name is. Hello, everyone. That's not a good start. Talking to one person saying, hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. This is Peng Shuai. Regarding the recent news released on the official website of the WTA, the content has not been confirmed or verified by myself, and it was released without my consent. The news in that release, including the allegation of sexual assault, is not true. I'm not missing, nor am I unsafe. I've just been resting at home and everything is fine. Thank you again for caring about me. If the WTA publishes any more news about me, please verify it with me and release it with my consent. As a professional tennis player, I thank you all for your companionship and consideration. I hope to promote Chinese tennis with you all. If I have the chance in the future, I hope Chinese tennis will become better and better. Once again, thank you for your consideration. So, very worried about promoting Chinese tennis, not so worried about sexual assault, according to that email.
And a sick joke to talk multiple times about consent in regards to the release of the statement of her accusations, when it's supposedly, when it's an obviously fake statement retracting quite credible rape allegations.
That's a great point, Melina. And we should explain why it was quite obviously a fake statement. Not only was I reading it with great sarcasm because it made no sense, but also it was written only in English. It wasn't written like that. They made sure, whoever wrote it made sure that it didn't go out in Chinese, in Mandarin. It went out only in English. It didn't go out in the domestic Chinese media. No, none of them reported on the contents at all. It only went to English media. And despite the fact that Peng is a household name in China, so you'd think they'd be interested in whether she disappeared or not. Also, like we said, it's addressed to everyone, even though it's supposedly to Stephen Simon. It was published by CGTN. It was published by the Chinese international media. So how they got an email to Steve Simon, I don't know, unless it's fake. Also, the cursor, it was a screen cap of a document because you saw the cursor there in the middle of the supposed email. Emails don't have cursors in the middle of them. So it's very, very suspicious, okay? Steve Simon responds with The statement released today by Chinese state media concerning Peng Shuai only raises my concerns as to her safety and whereabouts. I have a hard time believing that Peng Shuai actually wrote the email we received or believes what is being attributed to her. The WTA and the rest of the world need independent, verifiable proof that she is safe. I have repeatedly tried to reach her via numerous forms of communication to no avail. Peng Shuai must be allowed to speak freely without coercion or intimidation from any source. Her allegation of sexual assault must be respected, investigated with full transparency and without censorship. So that's impressive. Good on him. That's not like the NBA, I'll tell you that. Jen Psaki also expressed concern, as did the UN. Meanwhile, YouTube, by the way, demonetizes at least one video about Peng Shuai rape allegations, which got a lot of attention in the conservative media. Their video is found not suitable for all advertisers. So, anyway. Then, in response to that from the WTA, the editor of the Global Times, which is a Communist Party newspaper, the editor tweeted out, I acquired 2 video clips somehow, which show Peng Shuai was having dinner with her coach and friends in a restaurant. The video content clearly shows they are shot on Saturday Beijing time. Now I'm going to play you the video of those clips over the top of this. I'm not going to play the audio because there's no points in Chinese. I'll just play it now. So what you're seeing is a supposedly spontaneous conversation between Peng Shuai and her coach and some other people at a Chinese restaurant, where the video starts off with someone saying, okay, now is perfect in Chinese. And then there's a couple of seconds of silence where they look at each other. And then Peng Shuai laughs awkwardly. And their coach says something very natural, like, tomorrow is November the 20th. And someone else says, no, tomorrow is the 21st. And then someone else says, oh yes, the 21st. And they're having this very natural conversation where they're all saying the date for reasons.
5 times in a very short clip.
Yes. So that's the first clip. That's the first completely unsuspicious clip. And then there was another video, this one here, where she's signing autographs from kids. And the editor of the Global Times tweeted, can any girl fake such sunny smile under pressure? Those who suspect Peng Shuai is under duress, how dark they must be inside. There must be many, many forced political performances in their countries. And so that was also obviously not very convincing. And
because I'm happy to concede that there are plenty of forced political appearances in our country.
Yeah, sure, why not?
Fine.
Yep. And the WTA chairman, Steve Simon, issued another statement saying that while it's positive to see her, it remains unclear if she's free and able to make decisions and take actions on her own without coercion or external interference. This video alone is insufficient. Good on him. Honestly, he's not taking any crap. Who is taking crap, though, is the IOC, who then held a video call with Peng, which went for like half an hour with her and her friend, who happens to be a minder from the Chinese government, where she said she was safe and well. And they didn't discuss sexual assault allegations at all. They didn't come up during that conversation. And the IOC then put out a statement saying, I was relieved to see that Peng Shuai was doing fine, which is our main concern. She appeared to be relaxed. They offered her our support to stay in touch at any time of her convenience, which she obviously appreciated. WTA rejected it again. This video does not change our call for a full, fair and transparent investigation without censorship. Yeah. And this is an important one. Oh yeah, then WTA also withdrew from China completely, all their tournaments from China, because they had a few. And they said, I don't see how I can ask our athletes to compete there when Peng Shuai is not allowed to communicate freely and has seemingly been pressured to contradict her allegation of sexual assault. Given the current state of affairs, I'm also greatly concerned about the risks that all of our players and staff could face if we were to hold events in China in 2022, which is a great call. Like if some tennis player said something that the Chinese government didn't want them to say, there's a danger they could get arrested, or not be allowed on the plane back.
Especially because a lot of players have come out in support of Peng Shuai online, like Serena Williams and Naomi Osaka were all tweeting, with the hashtag So it's not like, you know, it's a theoretical thing of what if they say something that China doesn't like. A lot of them already have.
Yeah, that's a great call. Now, someone who's not worried about that call is the IOC, who are holding the Winter Olympics in China in a few weeks, like in like 2 months. They don't seem to care at all. So I suppose it's not a surprise that they're trying to tamp down on these allegations. Why? Because they want their Winter Olympics to go off without a hitch. But what are your thoughts about the whole thing, about China in this regard, and about the IOC, and about the Winter Olympics? So there's a whole lot of things we can talk about there. What are your thoughts?
I mean, obviously what's happened with Peng Shui is a disgrace. I mean, it's also hardly unique. China has been disappearing a lot of, high profile people, like the Alibaba founder was disappeared after he criticized the Chinese regulatory system. And it's basically like Xi Jinping brought in these security laws that make it basically legal for the state to secretly detain anyone if they deem them a threat to national security, which is a very broad, arbitrary thing that they can place on anyone. And that's to say nothing of the fact that, you know, what's happening with the Uyghur population in China. They estimate that more than 1 million Uyghurs have been disappeared by China in the past few years under these laws. So, I mean, if the IOC cared at all about human rights, they wouldn't have awarded China the Winter Olympics in the first place. And, you know, obviously they're, you know, not going to backtrack now. And I mean, I think that the WTA has made a great move by withdrawing for the reasons we've already said, and also because, to me, like, they're the ones taking a financial hit by their decision. They're taking a stand, they're taking a hit for it to protect their athletes who they're supposed to protect. So I think that's absolutely the right thing. Obviously the IOC, much less respectable and not about to disrupt the Olympics, but then the question obviously goes to how do other people respond, and do governments boycott the Olympics? Obviously the US government is looking at that, as is the Australian government. And then the question is, do you just do a diplomatic boycott with the government not sending their officials, or do you extend that to athletes, which is a thing that some people, including your favorite Tom Cotton, have suggested.
Yeah, what do you think?
I think in terms of boycott, I mean, there's two questions for me. It's, would it work, and should they do it? In terms of would it work, I do think, you know, the whole point of hosting the Olympics, for a country to host the Olympics, it's an exercise in national pride. So embarrassment does actually matter. Like, it is one of the cases where I think a boycott, there is some sort of merit to the idea of you know, it actually having an effect. And I think it's good to use the run up to the Olympics and the threats of boycotts to draw attention to the Peng Shui situation and the broader human rights situations in China. So it is actually a good time to be raising those kind of issues and to use that threat to put some pressure publicly on China. But in terms of, I guess another question for me also is whether individual athletes, if they chose to protest at the Olympics, like, are they going to be safe? Like, from both China and the IOC, you're not supposed to protest at the Olympics, although they relaxed that a little bit for the Summer Olympics this year after all the sort of Black Lives Matter protests that were happening with athletes. So will the IOC in China allow, or what will they do if people try to use the Olympics to make a stand while it's happening, is a interesting question to me, and whether athletes will be safe if they do that. But then more broadly, in terms of the question of whether there should be a boycott, I think a diplomatic boycott is definitely warranted. You know, there's a lot to protest, and it doesn't cost much for these countries to not send their officials. It's pretty piss weak in terms of you know, responses you can do to massive human rights abuses. In terms of the athletes, you know, and people like Tom Cotton wanting a full boycott with athletes, the problem that I have with that is that even if you think it's the right thing to do for athletes to boycott, it's very easy for a Tom Cotton to take a stand against China in the Olympics in that way, because he's not the one who has to sacrifice anything. You know, for Olympic athletes, they spend their whole lives training, they might get one chance, or at a minimum, they get a chance once every 4 years. If they're lucky, they may get to go more than once. And so you're talking about an enormous sacrifice on the part of athletes if you don't let them participate to support Tom Cotton's stand. Even if you think they should care and they should want to protest and boycott, it's pretty harsh, I think, to make that decision for them. I also find it ironic that Tom Cotton wants people to sacrifice their jobs to support his China policy, but then is opposed to vaccine mandates because he doesn't want people to put their own jobs at risk for a government policy that's literally saving American lives. So he's really picking and choosing when he wants to force people to do things in their workplace for the sake of a government policy. So in that sense, I'm a bit uncomfortable with that. In contrast, say the WTA, which has really taken a strong stance and made a strong point, but hasn't sacrificed the opportunity of the athletes to do so. It's the WTA taking a financial hit for their own principles, which is a good thing. But those tournaments can go ahead in other countries, so they're not disadvantaging other people to make their own point. So I think that's a bit harsh. But I suppose one option would be if you allowed athletes to compete, but you didn't brand them as Team USA. That's an option.
Oh yeah, like they did in the Summer Olympics with Russia.
Which was a punishment in those cases.
Yeah,
and it would still take something away from athletes who care about representing their country. But if you really wanted to make a strong point, I think you could just say Team USA isn't going. Individuals from America can go or not go if they choose to. So I don't think that anyone is really talking about that as an option, but to me that could be a good compromise option. And I also think you could pressure not just China, but pressure the IOC to allow political protests to happen without sanctions of the athletes so that people could go, but then if they chose to, make their own stand while they're there. So those to me, I think would be better things than forcing athletes to not attend. But I certainly think it would be worthwhile for countries to make a point. Not just because of the Peng Shui situation, but also because of all the many other human rights abuses that are going on. Not insubstantial.
I reckon that's a good idea, the one you suggested about the team pulling out but allowing individual athletes to go if they want to, because it is a real schlep for athletes to spend 20 years of their life training and then missing a 7-year window, 3 years on either side of the Olympics of their career because of, as you say, because of Tom Cotton's political decision. What people have talked about doing is having a freedom games or something for countries that boycott China. So actually at the same time as the Olympics, as competition for the Olympics, as a means of not just boycotting China, but actually diminishing the China Games as well by competing against them, which is that I guess that would have its effect, but I don't think athletes would like that. I don't think that would be a replacement for athletes who miss out on the Olympics. So I think that's still harsh from the athlete's point of view. I should say one thing about this is that you were saying you don't know why China got them in the first place. Do you know why China got the Winter Olympics in the first place?
It doesn't, answer in a second, but it doesn't surprise me in the sense that, the US, everyone around the world does business with China all the time. So,
but it's not just that. They were the only ones who wanted to do it. This is a problem. This is a real problem that increasingly the Olympics cost a lot of money. Democracies don't want to do it. Like Japan, if they had their time again, there's no way they would have done the Summer Olympics. America's doing them again soon, the Summer Olympics, but increasingly, especially Winter Olympics, but even the Summer Olympics, there's increasingly less prestige with holding the Olympics and higher costs, and democratic countries have too much aggro about hosting the Olympics. They just don't want to do it. And so the only countries that are going to put up their hand are going to be dictatorships. There's going to be more of this. This is going to be a problem over and over and over again. Because you're going to end up having the only people putting up their hand being, these shitty tin pot dictatorships because of the prestige to them as dictators, and they don't care about the cost. So this is going to be a real problem. We got to work out as a society how we plan to deal with this kind of stuff, because it's going to happen every single Olympics soon. And it's every single time it'll be just promoting the regime that people want to protest against. So I don't know where they go from there. It's actually a real problem. But in the meantime, with China, the thing about letting athletes go, I suppose it's their choice, but but it's still the same problem the WTA guy said, is that you're actually putting these people at risk. So I suppose if they choose to go to risk it themselves, well, what are you going to do? But I think it's not a bad idea. The one about the middle ground between diplomatic boycotting and actual boycotting of just boycotting the country, but allowing the athletes to go as individuals. But what people like Ted Cruz say is what China want to do more than anything is dominate their Olympics. So by us boycotting, it helps them. What's better is to go there and kick their ass, is what Ted Cruz says. I don't know. It's a really interesting area, especially given what I said. This is going to keep on happening. It's yeah. Anyway, look, you got to go. So what? You know what? There's so much more to go. Like we haven't even talked about Wokesgiving, which is like 2 weeks old now, and I haven't gotten to the lab leak stuff or the Fauci. Oh my god! Yeah, look,
you're gonna have to rename it Wokesmas.
Yes, I have to call it Wokesmas. If people want to, I'm gonna tell you guys what's happening. I'm gonna do an Unleashed, which isn't really Unleashed, just a coda of you telling you guys what's happening next year, the details. I promised you I'd tell you what's going on with this podcast and everything else. If you guys want a spare on because I'm not going to spend an hour and a half talking about this shit just now by myself. If you guys want a spare on Wokesgiving and whatever little things got left over, I'm not going to do any reading. Not doing any reading for. I am listening to ELO and I'm watching Dave Gorman. I'm not doing any reading. I'm on holiday. If you want an extra one, are you okay, Melina, to do a part 2, something like in a week's time or something? Yeah. Okay. All right. Cool. All right. If you guys want a part 2 about woke stuff and some leftover COVID stuff and whatever else Melina wants to talk about, then tell us in the comments. If you don't care, if you don't give a stuff about woke stuff and you just want a holiday as well, that's fine by me. Just let me know or just don't pay any attention. And happy holidays. I'll say goodbye after the white flash. But if you want one more, we'll give you a spare with all that stuff. So just let us know in the comments one way or another. That's on the YouTube and on the Facebook. And I will see you, Melina, maybe next week, maybe not. Otherwise, thank you very much for taking time out from your extremely sleep-deprived schedule because of the aforementioned reasons about things that happened to you this year. And I really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Not a problem. Thanks for having me.
Where can people find you?
At Melina Wicks on Twitter.
There we go. Okay. Thanks, Melina. See you later. I'll see you guys after the white flash. Welcome to the post-white flash zone. This is not really an Unleashed. It's like a slightly less leashed. I know I say every single week that Unleashed is going to be too long, and it's really, really long. Today it's short. Firstly, there is something I forgot about when we talked about China, which I do want to share with you before the end of this podcast. I think there's an increasing realization dawning on the demographers of the world that when the world's population starts to fall this century, it might fall quite rapidly. Now, obviously, a number of environmental types might think that's a good thing. I know Dick Smith does. Yeah, and it can be a good thing if managed well. But if it's not managed well, then it could lead to a potential collapse in some societies. You know, it could be a bad thing if the population starts to drop precipitously without fully controlling the demographic balance of society. Anyway, we've got a few decades left to get it right yet. Like none of this is going to start happening till the second half of the century anyway. But China is quite relevant in this regard, because it's possible that China might be facing the biggest problem of all demographically, not just because of the one-child policy way back when, though that probably didn't help. It's a number of factors combined, but China, some demographers believe that China is on track to be about to suffer the biggest demographic collapse in history that didn't involve wars or disease. It's, of course, China's fertility rate stats are impossible to believe, like all of their economic stats. It's hard to know, but there are a number of people who have tried to pierce the veil somewhat to come up with some real stats about China's fertility rate, and it's not high. It's at the rate that some people believe, and I'm thinking of a couple of people in particular, that it's possible that even though China right now has a population, 1.3 billion compared to America's 330 million, something like that. It's like 4 times greater. There's a reasonable chance that America might have a higher population than China by the end of the century. And that's about 430 million in America to 400 million in China. That's what I'm talking about when I'm saying a big demographic collapse. Now that may change, that may not turn out like that. But let's put it this way. Replacement rate for fertility rate is about 2.1 kids per woman. China's fertility rate, we don't know for sure, but a number of demographers put it somewhere between 0.9 and 1.2. So half replacement rate. So we could see a very large decrease in population soon. And that is continuing to drop. That hasn't leveled out yet, because a lot of China is still rural and still poor, and as they become urban, their fertility rate drops through the floor, even further than Japan's has. Really drops through the floor. Korea has a few problems as well, South Korea as well, but China might be the most out of control, and a number of government factors aren't helping out. I'm not going to go into too much detail because it's all very speculative. All I'm saying is that people are acting like China is this inevitability, this giant bulldozer that's just going to crush the entire world over this century by dint of its very large population. That might not be the case. China might, I think a lot of economists think that China is heading for some pretty tough times over the next decade or two anyway. But at the end of that, they might have another little window in the sun for a little period of time. But then, by the time you get into the 2050s, 2060s, China might have some serious problems. So I just want to, no, this is not going to be relevant for a long time. You're not going to remember I said this when it comes to the 2050s. But just watch this space. That's all I'm saying. It's interesting. You don't hear this very often because this is still way off into the distance. Demography, people don't pay much attention to until it's upon you. But there's one for the long-term future. Maybe things aren't that rosy for China after all. We'll see. Anyway, other than that, I'm going to leave it for you guys because you know what to do. If you want more for this year, you let me know in the comments and I will respond with potentially one bonus episode. If you want an episode focused around Wokesmas, more COVID stuff, some Fauci stuff, whatever, lab leak, whatever. Chris Cuomo, maybe. We were ready to talk about him as well. And anything Melina wants to bring along, let me know in the comments. All I can guarantee you is there will be nothing new because I am not reading anymore. I am listening to ELO. I'm on a massive ELO tear at the moment. Tightrope, what a great song that is. Oh, yeah. Anyway, do yourself a favour. And not just watching Dave Gorman, I just watched Mitch McTaggart. Very interesting on SBS. It's a great series there. I would recommend that one as well. But anyway, I didn't want to talk about the TV. I want to talk about what we're going to be doing over the next few years, like I promised you. Now, I don't know for absolute sure. Let me tell you what I know, and then let me tell you what I hope. What I know is that next year I'm not going to be making a new TV show next year. I thought I was going to, but they've moved it back, it seems, to 2023. That's not even guaranteed, but anyway, that's what I hope. What I know is it's not next year, so I've got some free time. I'm not going to spend that free time reading full-time American politics just so I can make the podcast. I'm going to take a holiday. I'm going to start preparing other shows as well. I've already got another show in development, potentially for a little bit later down the track. I'm going to try and develop a few others as well while I'm at it. I've got to be a break. I might even learn to drive. That's right. I'm 44 and I don't know how to drive. I am that pathetic. Might even meet my kids who I live with, but They barely know me because I'm always reading and doing podcasts. And play my dog. Yeah, I might introduce him to my dog if there's a bonus. We'll see. Anyway, but I'm gonna take 6 months off. Then I'm gonna start reading again in about June-ish, July-ish, and then we'll start doing the podcast straight away. So as soon as I start reading, so it's a 6 month break from the podcast. I'm sorry if I suppose that's the headline, which might piss some people off, but sorry. Play America comes back probably September-ish, I'd say. Maybe August. We'll see. I'll make sure I'm fully read by the time it comes back. We'll do that into the midterms. Then there'll be another break at the beginning of 2023 from Playing America and for the podcast, when I think I hope we'll be making this other series, which I've been working on for quite a while. And it's an entertainment series. I won't go into details now, but hopefully that'll be the beginning of 2023. And then that will then roll straight into the primary season. The primary season, say around June-ish, 2023, Play America will hopefully be back along with the podcast. And then we're just going straight on through to the end of 2024. So we will be back into the cycle eventually, but there'll be a few spotty years here. If something big happens, I'll do some quick reading and I'll be on here. We might do a special on ABC News or something like that. But I'm going to try and concentrate on other stuff for a little while. So that's the plan. But other than next year, I don't know anything for sure. That's more what we've been talking about. Like, not just me, but honchos. So I suspect that that's how it's going to pan out, but I don't know for a fact. So there you go. I might even tinker with an Australian news format. A few people have asked about why I don't ever do Australian news, and I just need the right format. I might tinker with that. We'll see. Anyway, thank you everyone for sticking with us this year. We've averaged about 10,000 downloads for every podcast all year. Barely lost a listener since February, which is amazing because we are irregular and we take breaks, and our production values are, let's be generous, wanting. It's not the most mainstream product, so I do appreciate people. And the YouTube videos and Facebook views, the video views have dropped maybe 20% all year, maybe 25%. It's not much considering what we do. So I'm very grateful that the fact that you guys take an interest in this kind of stuff. I'm not just talking to myself. I do appreciate that. Thank you for continuing on with us, and hopefully you'll be there when the adventure continues, as it will. We'll be back soon enough, and I promise you, when the 2023 rolls around and we go all the way, that's going to be pretty hardcore. There's going to be a lot of podcasts, a lot of TV. I'm going to go even harder, I think, than 2020 this time. I'm going to go nuts. Anyway, but thank you all again, and whether we're back next week for a bonus ep or not, Merry Christmas, Happy New Year, and see you next year.